Good morning, everyone. Can you hear me okay? That's a way to get everyone to sit down. Thanks very much. So I just wanted to check, Rosemary, are we recording on YouTube now, or are we going to start recording soon? We're recording now. Okay. Good morning, everyone. Minister Malcom, Noonan, thank you very much for coming this morning. My name is Ella McSweeney, and I'm just delighted to be here for the first ever Blackstairs Nature Biodiversity Day. It's a marvellous morning for it. Just to let you know before I say a few words, COVID protocol, keep your masks on unless you're talking. If you want to make a comment, obviously just take your mask off and then put it back on again as well. And we are actually being recorded for YouTube, so there's a live stream going out now, and we have a really healthy number of people watching as well. So when you talk, if you ask questions or whatever, that will be also relayed onto YouTube, just to let you know that. So over the next 7 hours or so, we have a collection of extraordinary contributors in their field from all parts of Ireland who've come here this morning. Farmers, ecologists, wildlife officers, archaeologists, policymakers, ministers as well. So it's a really exciting opportunity to learn from the best, and hopefully for the Blackstairs community and the people who want to make change here to be able to come away with an idea of what the challenges are, but perhaps more importantly than that, definitely more importantly than that, the kind of action points and the things that we can do, we can all do together to be able to affect the kind of change that people want to do here. And I suppose we're here to talk about what the contributors, the panellists, have learned about how communities can work together in a shared landscape for the good of nature, for the good of livelihoods, and obviously in the context of the unbelievable urgency of the situation we are in with the twin climate crisis and biodiversity crisis as well. Some of us yesterday went on a really fascinating field trip around what I'm told was only about 20% of the Blackstairs. And it was just fascinating to meet the farmers who own and manage the land. We heard from locals who expressed how they feel the Blackstairs should develop. And we also had a really engaging talk from a wildlife expert who explained what is up there now. And it is just an unbelievably beautiful landscape to have spent a few hours in. I was minded by Rachel Carson's line, it's not half so important to know as to feel. And yesterday, it certainly gave me a chance to understand the information, but also get a sense of the emotion behind the stakeholders and how they feel about the Blackstairs. And one thing clearly binds them all, and that is an utter love of the Blackstairs, of how the landscape has shaped and supported their ancestors in the past, what it does for them today, and the responsibility they feel to look after it, to give back to it for the future. So ahead of us in the next couple of hours is what I imagine is a kind of evolutionary few hours of how the community in the Blackstairs can move forward. And I was thinking this morning, I hope it makes sense to call it a kind of ideas mehel in the extraordinary panellists that we have, to hear what they have to say, to identify the challenges, as I've said, and the action points for the Blackstairs. So by the end of the day, hopefully people will have, in the community, a good set of ideas that they can go away with and to build on. So that's enough from me. I'm delighted we are in this beautiful, unbelievably beautiful surroundings of Huntington Castle, and thanks to Alex Durdin Robinson, who lives here and owns the place, and he's going to give just a few words. Alex.
Thank you very much, Ella. So guys, you're all very welcome. I'm going to keep this very quick because we're on a little bit of time pressure at start, but just to obviously to welcome you all very, very sincerely. I just like at the start to just say a huge thank you to Rosemary and Anto and Sissy and Joe and Sarah for the enormous amount of work they put in to actually get this thing here today. So I'd like to give them a little round of applause. So by way of parish notices, if obviously in the event of a huge blazing inferno, there's a fire escape there. You can also leave through there, should you like, or through the back. And if you want to all assemble in the car park, just if that ever does happen. If you would like to go, if you need to go to the loo or the toilets, what I would ask is if you could make your way out the back, which is that door there, where Rosemary's advertising just now, because it's much, and you can make your way around in the toilets or just there if you need to. So basically, a very, very quick word on why we're here in this building. This is apparently the oldest barn theatre in Ireland. It was originally a threshing barn, so you could pull a horse and cart through the double arches, and basically then the horse didn't have to turn around, because horses aren't great at reversing when they're tied to a cart. So the horse could go through, which is actually very serendipitous for us, because it was then used for threshing, and you'd be able to haul the bags up, block and tackle in there, and then you'd have a good flow of wind for blowing out all your chaff, which is great for ventilation in the COVID times. Also, of course, Katrina, I must thank Katrina for the huge amount of work that Katrina's also put in, which is all much, much appreciated. And indeed, of course, the panel who are giving up their time and putting their effort into it. So without any further ado, guys, I'm going to hand over to our speakers. And thank you all very much for coming.
Thank you so much, Alex. And I'm just going to briefly introduce, for people who don't know them, Joe Kerwin and Katrina Ryan from the Blackstairs Nature Group. And they're going to give a few words about, I suppose, what today is all about and how it emerged. Katrina.
So good morning, everyone. My name is Katrina Ryan. I'm one of the Blackstairs Nature Group. So about 8 weeks ago, I was invited over for a cup of tea here at Huntington Castle for the first time. I'd never been to Huntington Castle before. And I naively accepted that cup of tea. I had a hunch there was something going on, because I know Joe Kerwin very well. I said, Joe, no jobs. He said, no jobs. And I walked away just 8 weeks ago, having agreed to set up the day today. So I have to say, what we thought we knew we were onto something special. And what we thought was, was going to be kind of a small local event that would be kind of a starting point for all of this. It suddenly became a national event. So the appetite and the support has been quite overwhelming. So I'm personally, I say, purebred Blackstairs as such. My parents, my grandparents, also, they're all farmers of the Blackstairs from the commonage. And the Blackstairs means so much and to so many different people. Whether you're making your living from it or whether you get to enjoy it for recreation. So I think that's coming through, and it's been really encouraging, all of the different projects and the different groups that are coming to us to participate for this event today. So just in terms of jobs, I think, if there was one job that we're all to come away with today, because there is Huntington, we all get a job, is to turn some of the learnings from today into actions, and to take some of these learnings forward and see something happening, that we're not just talking, that something will happen. And before I hand it back over to Joe Jobs Kerwin, I just want to thank our sponsors. We had some really great support from SciCap, the Carlow County Rural Partnership, from Law Pro, from the online donations, which all helped because we're a small group of 5. Just pulled this together on a shoestring, and also to Linda from Sugar and Spice, who sponsored the lunch bags today, and it's all locally sourced produce. So thanks to everyone. Thank you.
So Joe Kerwin, as Katrina says, is my name. I live on Barker's Road in Bunclody. I grew up here in Clonegall, and I inherited a small holding 4 years ago on the Blackstairs. My great-great-grandfather came from Ballywilliam in New Ross as a blacksmith, and they had a forge and a very small holding up there. And I suppose growing up in the place, and you see, you maybe don't appreciate what people that come into the area see more. And I suppose it was a threat of industrial development was sort of what brought us all together. I didn't know Rosemary till about 18 months ago. And it's because of that we said, well, look, there's lots of good things happening on the Blackstairs. It's great to have Keelcha here today too, because I think they are a serious stakeholder on the mountain, and they have a lot to do up there. I think for too long maybe has been a commercially run forest, and we all need timber for housing and stuff, but I think we have to do it maybe in a more ecologically focused way. One of the other things I want to do is just give Ella a Blackstairs blanket. It is a Wexford wool. And it's made in Graignamanagh. So, and I suppose this is one tiny bit of the Blackstairs. If you're in Graignamanagh, you have Monk's Grange in Rathnewer, where the monks from Graignamanagh had their grange, and that wool came from a Galway sheep in Wexford. But I'd say to Martin and all the farmers that are here today, there's no price for wool. I've grown up listening to stories where farmers kept hoggets on the hill and they were able to buy farms out of them. And to me, wool maybe as a building product or, you know, as an insulation product, you know, to displace the whole oil industry, you know, and have a good homegrown product, because farmers need to, you know, to keep the hill going, we need to have farmers on it too, you know, or a certain amount of manure. So that's all I have to say. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Nothing makes me happier than Irish wool. That's absolutely gorgeous. I'm delighted now to introduce Minister Malcom Noonan, who's here with us for the day. Minister of State for Heritage and Electoral Reform, NPWS, Department of Housing, Local Government and Heritage. Minister.
Thanks, Ella. Good morning, everyone. Wow, what a special place. It's really fantastic to be here. It's more an honour of an show on you. It's a really great privilege to be here at this really important event at a critical time for nature in Ireland and globally. And I really want to thank everyone at the Blackstairs community for their invitation here this morning. It's, I know we've had some conversations about this quite a while ago, but to bring us to this day, I think congratulations. It's such a really great achievement. I think these conversations are important. I want to say particularly thanks to our host, the Durdin Robinson family as well, a family with a long history of caring for the natural heritage of this area and of being very welcoming hosts, going so far as to accommodate the NPWS staff back in the 1970s who were undertaking squirrel surveys in this area. And so I suppose since I took on the role of Minister with Responsibility for Heritage, I've had a number of priorities that I want to achieve in order to safeguard the future for nature in this country. And I'll explain some of those in detail in a moment. But first, I just want to recognise the importance of the private individuals and of communities who cherish Ireland's natural heritage and who can play such a significant role in this task as well. Whether it's taking part in citizen science surveys or doing their bit to reduce their own daily footprint on the planet, creating, protecting or restoring habitats in their gardens and communities, or hosting events such as today's, or contributing to the GoFundMe page, which is important. The importance of these contributions cannot be undervalued or underestimated, as their enormous task of reversing biodiversity loss cannot be delivered by government alone. And I know certainly I've been involved in a lot of citizen science projects, from monitoring Dá Benton's bats on a river Nore in Kilkenny to managing invasive species, and it really is hugely rewarding and something we're seeing an awful lot more of with various river trust projects or Norvision as well. I think all of these projects are hugely important. So I just want to thank the hosts and all the participants here today for being here. You care about the future, both for nature and for ourselves, and the two are inextricably linked. My top priority over the past year has been firstly to restore funding to support our heritage, placing nature, heritage and biodiversity at the heart of what this government does well. Central to this and to the National Parks and Wildlife Service, who do incredible work with curtailed resources, delivering for the citizen directly through the agencies and bodies under our aegis, such as the Heritage Council and the National Biodiversity Data Centre, managed by the Council. The NPWS is a crucial and important service that is mandated with the protection, conservation and presentation of our natural heritage, much of which is on view here in this wonderful landscape in the Blackstairs. In the coming months, these mountains will be surveyed for red grouse by the NPWS, and I know this area was also one of the last sites for corncrake in the southeast, now restricted to the northwest and the focus of a detailed life programme run by the NPWS there. Our nature and biodiversity, with the elements of water, minerals and air, combine in the dynamic ecosystems that give us vital services that society and our economy depends on, like soil fertility, water purification, carbon sequestration and storage, and of course that sense of peace and wonder that so many of us benefit from. In 2019, we learned that many of our protected habitats were poor or inadequate, and almost half were in decline. That same year, the Dáil declared a climate and biodiversity emergency. The NPWS resourcing was not sufficient to address the biodiversity crisis with the level of urgency that was required. And I was determined that the hallmark of my tenure as Minister would be to leave a positive legacy for biodiversity in Ireland, to deliver on the government's unprecedented ambition for nature and respond comprehensively to the programme for government commitment to strengthen the NPWS and make it the voice for nature that we need it to be. I was very pleased to announce this week that the NPWS funding would increase to over 47 million in 2022 a total increase of 64% since I became Minister, bringing it back to a level not seen since before the financial crisis. The funding secured will also enable staffing at the NPWS to return to pre-2008 levels. This has already led to the establishment of a new team who will focus on putting in place conservation measures for our special areas of conservation and special protection areas, a wildlife crime unit, a substantial cohort of new conservation rangers, as well as the recruitment of ecological and scientific expertise, field staff, guides and administrative staff. These major achievements that are already having a positive impact for nature and biodiversity all across the country, and I will do my very best to ensure that we continue on this trajectory over the next number of years. But we can and we must do a whole lot more. For instance, realising the totality of our shared vision for the National Parks and Wildlife Service requires further transformative action that acknowledges the past, reflects the present and renews the future. I am now leading on this through a comprehensive phased process: review, reflect, renew, a strategic action plan for the future of the NPWS. And I would like to take this opportunity to thank Dr. Micheál Cinnéide, who is here with us today, for his Trojan work as Deputy Chair of this review phase process with Professor Jane Stout of Trinity College Dublin. Micheál and Jane heard from over 3,000 people and groups, providing an external perspective on the NPWS and conducting an analysis of comparable organisations across Europe in order to inform a suite of recommendations. The next phase, Reflect, will build on this work and develop more detailed specifications of NPWS's needs in terms of governance, organisational structures, communications, data systems and future resourcing. And the final Renew phase will detail the objectives and prioritise actions that will equip the NPWS to deliver on the ambitious objectives and targets emerging from the Programme for Government, the post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework, the EU Biodiversity Strategy towards 2030, Heritage Ireland 2030, the new National Biodiversity Action Plan, which is being developed in 2022, and to work with other government departments in shaping their programmes for the benefit of nature, such as the Rural Development Programme, and to be the respected voice for nature that so many have called for. With the support of my colleague, Minister Darragh O'Brien, this strategic action plan for the future of the NPWS will be brought to Cabinet by the end of 2021 and implemented in the lifetime of this government. I look forward to working on this exciting new chapter, not just for the NPWS, but for nature. But for today, I'm really looking forward to the conversations that are about to take place. It's going to be really important. And these conversations, as has been said, need to lead to actions. We are in a decade of ecosystem restoration. It's a really important time. But I also believe from the conversations we're having over the cup of tea, it's a really exciting time to be involved and to be part of this. And I think certainly our job is at government level is to bring the top-down policies, the policies, the support, the enabling policies that are vitally important. But what's really important is what happens from bottom up at grassroots community level. And that's why I'm deeply impressed by what's happening here in the Blackstairs. And I look forward to the conversations, look forward to the chats, and look forward to the actions that are going to emerge from today. And I wish everybody all the very best with the deliberations. I'm really looking forward to the event. Thank you, everyone.
Minister, thank you so much, and thank you also for being here this afternoon as well. And hopefully we can have some more contributions as well from you later on in the afternoon. I'm delighted now to introduce a video we're going to see before our first panel, and it's a pre-recorded slideshow presentation by Brian Power showing some of the wildlife of the Blackstairs.
Ain't no sorrow, just wholeness and peace. But I So first of all, I'm delighted to introduce Dr. Micheál O'Conaighte, who's my left-hand man today for the panel, and he's going to co-host the sessions and also hopefully be able to take some sort of key learning points and action points that we'll be able to discuss at the end of today. I'd like to introduce the panellists. We have Anya Murray, who is an environmental policy analyst, an ecologist, a reporter with ECOLOGY, and also does some really beautiful work on RTE Lyric FM. Dr. Liam Lysett, who is the director of the National Biodiversity Data Centre in Waterford. I have Dr. Stephanie Marr, who's a biodiversity research officer with Teagasc, previously a biodiversity consultant to the President of Ireland and the OPW, and who has a PhD on the nesting ecology of solitary bees. I also have Lorcan Scott, who's a wildlife officer with the Heritage Council, who has a wide local knowledge of the Blackstairs. And then we also have Alan Walsh from the National Parks and Wildlife Service. We have, sorry, I'm looking around to make sure I point to the right person, Ciara O'Mahony, wildlife officer with the NPWS. We have Dr. Mary Tubridy, who is an environmental consultant and board member of the Heritage Council. And finally, Pádraig Fogarty, an ecologist with the Irish Wildlife Trust and author of the very well-known and successful book, Whittled Away. So there's a number of people here that we have to hear from. I suppose, Lorcan, starting with you, until we have the video ready, just give us a sense of what you know to be out there in the Blackstairs in terms of the wildlife.
Okay, well, for me, my knowledge of the Blackstairs comes from my days in the National Parks and Wildlife Service. I was a district conservation officer here. At the time, there was no ranger in Carlow, so I was covering some of the work here. And the Blackstairs, for me, is a place where, it's a small island of uplands in the southeast, which is very heavily developed for agriculture. So it's a bit of an oasis. It rises above the surrounding agricultural land, and it's a refuge then for a lot of species that find it difficult to survive in the more intensively farmed landscapes in the Wexford, Carlow and Kilkenny areas. It's very rich. There's very strong communities up here, very resilient communities up here. Lovely people to deal with when we were working with them. It was always a pleasure coming to the Blackstairs. It was also an area where people escaped to as well. It was very unusual in the fact that it had hang gliders and kiters up in the 9 Stone areas. And it's very accessible too. I always remember that the path up to the RTE Tower would bring you right into the heart of the uplands very quickly.
And we have a map here. I'm mindful people here will know exactly what we're talking about when we talk about the Blackstairs, but people watching maybe from all parts of Ireland. Can you just geographically position us when we're talking about the Blackstairs Mountains?
Yeah, well, so the Blackstairs Mountains are south of Carlow, north of Wexford. They're inland, so that they're away from the east coast, and they are the source of the rivers that flow down to the sea. So geographically, they're on the border of Carlow and Wexford. They also touch on parts of Kilkenny as well in parts. They're divided by the river valleys of the Slaney and the Barrow, which gives them that sort of elongated look to them. And they're very hard to miss now when you're driving around. They're very imposing.
Liam, can you talk a bit about the data that you are seeing in the data centre that's coming from the Blackstairs?
Yeah, thanks, Ella. Just, it's interesting you say I live at the other side of the mountains, and only last weekend I was walking through the fields and skylarks are back. There was a flock of skylarks flying over, so those are probably ones that have actually bred here during the summer, and they moved down to us in winter. Can I just widen the discussion a small little bit about the data that we have? I mean, you would have seen the video that Brian has done, where I'm sure he'll show the diversity of the wildlife that's in the area, and it's tremendous. It's a special area in the Blackstairs. And I suppose the perspective that I'd like to show is that a lot of that diversity is kind of it's a policy black spot or a blind spot, because I think what you heard, and it's wonderful to hear the resources that have been available to National Parks and Wildlife, because they've been starved of resources for so long. But what you don't often hear is that because of that reduction in funding, the policy focus of National Parks and Wildlife has become more restricted and more restricted and more restricted over the last few years. So the change, the paradigm change that we need actually now to conserve areas like this is that hopefully National Parks and Wildlife and the Biodiversity Data Centre can be better equipped to actually focus on the non-legally protected policy areas, because you're not going to get the engagement with the local communities through, you know, the Habitats Directive. Frankly, that's a different kind of policy stream. That's another string to the bow. So I suppose what I'm saying is that there's a lot of information. People like Brian Power has done tremendous work here in documenting the biodiversity value. There's a lot of the local community who are interested in engaging in it. And we need, I suppose the role of the data centre is actually to capture that, provide a structure where we can capture that and we can make that available for people to inform, you know, just the locality, inform people what's here, make the data available to inform policy, and hopefully to lead to better conservation action. So, as Lorcan said, this is a little oasis, and there's special aspects of biodiversity that you find here that you won't find elsewhere. And that's the kind of unique characteristic of the Blackstairs that we need to pull out.
Just briefly outline those special aspects.
Well, I suppose we know that there's a special habitats that are protected, but I just did a quick review of the database. There's 65 species that are threatened with extinction that have been recorded in the Blackstairs, and one of them, it's a species of bee, is critically endangered. So if we do, you know, there are really important conservation priorities that we know about, but there probably isn't the mechanisms or the policy focus to enable us to actually do anything concrete about it.
Stephanie, you've done some work up here, haven't you, with Professor James Stout. Just tell us briefly about that work.
Yeah, so I spent this heady summer of 2019 rambling around the farms of the Blackstairs Mountains looking at bees and flowers and hoverflies as part of a bigger national project called Farmicos that was actually led by Darrell Houlihan, who's in the room today. And what we were looking at was trying to assess what kind of habitats were available on the type of farms that you find here, and how well they were supporting our pollinator communities, particularly bees and hoverflies. And what we found from the data, and what is obvious from walking around, is that there are some incredible farms here that are doing so much to support pollinators and pollinating species at a time when they're under tremendous pressure. And a lot of that has to do with the natural landscapes that you find in the Blackstairs. So, you know, what I suppose I'm really talking about are those sort of hill farms. They're quite extensive. They've got these gorgeous hedgerows and heather and thistle and those things that aren't necessarily the kind of things we think of as being particularly rare or special, but so incredibly important when it comes to supporting things like solitary bees, which Liam touched on. So, yes, an oasis is certainly part of what I'd describe it.
And Alan from the NPWS, just to complete this small section on giving people a sense of what's out there, talk briefly, if you can, about the Greenland white-fronted geese and just how important this area is globally.
Well, the area per se, you know, the North Wexford area and Wexford, South Wexford in particular, on the Wexford Wildlife Reserve is the jewel in the crown, basically, of the entire population of white-fronted geese in Ireland, where at least half the world's population come to Ireland. And of course, they're on migration currently as we speak. They're arriving on the slopes up to at least 10 o'clock last night, so we could hear them yet during the course of the day, coming over the Blackstairs, which is the last hurdle that they have to encounter before they hit the relatively flat areas of South Wexford. So it is an important flyway for that species. One important issue is that when we're looking at the tracking of these birds, we have a number of them that are they carry GSM, GPS tags. So we know from accelerometers that they're flying at a particular height and speed, and we have a huge amount of data that comes in, you know, every So currently most of them are in Iceland at the moment, but they're getting out of there because it's getting quite cold. One other important thing I should just say about the Blackstairs is that it is a very important area for grouse. We have lost hen harrier over decades breeding in that area, but it's also an important nucleus of windchats breeding there. In recent times we've had goshawk also in the not too far from the Nine Stones, so that's another very important species.
And the red grouse, are they still here?
They're still here, as far as we know. There is
just clinging on, or?
They're reasonably thin on the ground, I think, but there will be a survey this winter, we hope, which will cover on a national basis. But Blackstairs will be part of that area to be covered.
And we had a very good sense yesterday from speaking to the farmers, speaking to wildlife experts of what is out there. I just wonder, for you, Alan, what do you think the potential is for restoration and bringing more life back to this area?
Well, I think if you can sort of tailor the landscape, that is, bring the landscape back to what it was like, sort of more heather and so on, you will get more grouse, you will get more associated species like that, like what Liam said, you know, sort of commoner species like skylark, like more windchats. You will also have merlin, of course, may start breeding there as well. It would be a wintering bird currently on the Blackstairs, and we've got species like snowbuntings up at the main mast. So there's quite a diverse range of species up there. You know, probably just touching maybe close to 70 species, probably, as Liam said. So there's great potential there for birds, and also in the lower foothills of the Blackstairs, you'll have wintering goosanders, which are now growing in terms of numbers. They're coming down from the Avoca River, from Wicklow Mountains National Park, and so on. So birds will spread in once the habitat is receptive to them.
Anya, can we zoom out a bit from the Blackstairs, and can you talk, I mean, I don't think anyone here needs to be persuaded of the urgency of the situation that we're in when it comes to climate and biodiversity crises, but can you talk a little bit about that in terms of the national picture, and just how imperative it is when you have an astonishing group of people who love this area and want to make things happen, how important it is that they're supported?
Yes, there are, like nationally, I'm not very familiar with the Blackstairs in particular, but nationally in Ireland we have so many wonderful natural habitats, and we have woodlands here that are temperate rainforests that are absolutely incredible places and habitats. These we are not protecting, we are losing at a rate of knots. We have the most incredible rivers all over Ireland that until very recently were absolutely packed with salmon and trout and crayfish and otters, and we're facing a situation where almost half of our rivers and lakes and coastal waters are not meeting the standard of good ecological status under the Water Framework Directive. They are polluted. Another habitat that I'd like to talk about particularly here is our grasslands. Everybody thinks that a grassland, this is the generalist would think that somewhere with grass growing in it, and they can't really distinguish the difference between a field full of reseeded perennial ryegrass and a species-rich pasture. And places like the Blackstairs and uplands all over the country, as well as lowland hay meadows, are incredible habitats. And Ireland has a wealth of these grassland habitats, from everything from calcareous, species-rich, orchid-rich grasslands to hay meadow with yellow rattle and a wealth of species. And of course these grassland types sustain a huge amount of bees and hoverflies and breeding birds, breeding waders, nesting birds. A huge amount of biodiversity depends on lots of our species-rich semi-natural grasslands. And something that I find really shocking is that in the last 15 years, we have lost 1/3 of our species-rich semi-natural grasslands. So since 2006, we in Ireland have lost 1/3 of this habitat type. And it's a habitat type that we're all so familiar with and that we're so famous for in Ireland. That is urgent. 15 years we've lost that. And the assessment, the National Parks and Wildlife Service assessment that we do every 7 years for the European Habitats Directives shows that that trend is still declining. It states that with current actions, it is unlikely that that downward trend will change in direction. So at the moment, if we keep doing what we're doing, that will double. We will have lost 50, 70, 80% in another 15 or 20 years. So that is very, very urgent. And for something it's not amazing old growth woodland, or it's not some complex habitat which takes, you know, a huge amount of sectors, it normally requires the main threat. Well, there's at one end of the scale, there's the abandonment of our species-rich semi-natural grasslands, and at the other end of the scale, there's intensification. But what the main management practice that's needed is to sustain the grazing that has managed those habitats for so long. That's something that a community like this Blackstairs community can really come together and do quite readily, you know.
Liam, I suppose it's an obvious thing to say, but you can't manage what you don't measure. Can you talk a little bit about the data that's there, you know, the need for some sort of audit of the Blackstairs, or what is needed from a data perspective urgently?
Well, you can't protect what you're not measuring, to be honest. That's the key thing. What we need, I think the state does quite a good job in terms of monitoring the requirements under the Habitats Directive. It's fairly well covered. We know practically nothing about invertebrate life, for example, what's happening in terms of change. We're still at the stage where we're trying to document what species we have and where they occur within Ireland, and that's people like Brian Power and Andrew, if he's here, would have done an awful lot of that work. We're making good progress on that. There's a huge gap in terms of monitoring, and like we have agri-environment schemes. I don't know how many billions have been spent on agri-environment schemes. There's been no ecological monitoring of the money that's been spent. I think it's a scandal, frankly. So we need to start putting together these building blocks, and they need to be driven by the needs for understanding the natural environment. We have a biodiversity crisis. Even if all of the actions that we put in place at the moment are considered successful, how do we gauge that? We need to have, it's like anything. If the forest sector, agricultural sector, they have all detailed information management systems to actually undermine what they're trying to do, measure their success or lack of. We have an absence of that in Ireland.
So for people who are outside the policy sort of network and all thing, what's the practical, logistical thing that needs to happen there? I mean, you know, I'm mindful that there's no biodiversity action plan for Carlow.
Yeah.
I mean, that seems like an obvious first step.
Well, I think, I mean, one of the things that we have done is that we're quite fortunate that we don't have a statutory role. We can cherry pick in one way, so we can pick the things. There's an amazing appetite out there for people to actually engage with biodiversity. And again, just back, sorry for labouring this point, it's not the formal kind of protection parts, but people go for a walk. As I say, watching for the skylarks come back every winter is beautiful. Seeing the yellowhammers, people love this. That's how you engage with people. And I suppose we need, I think we're doing is we're providing conduits, we're providing channels for people to actually, to harness that and show the cumulative impact. And, you know, Brian will be collecting his very detailed information on biodiversity. They can be added to a database. All the community can see that. They can download it. So we're building a kind of a critical mass of information. We're building the knowledge base. And it's not driven necessarily by statutory needs. It's very much driven by the community and what they're interested in. And what we need to do then on top of that, do more and more monitoring, which is more structured surveys. And that really will tell you what's happening in the wider countryside.
Mary Tuberty, can I bring you in here? Because, I mean, I presume everything you're hearing there makes complete sense. In terms of the data collection within the Blackstairs, it's about species, but it's also about the habitats.
Sorry about that. Could be my hearing aids, actually. Yes, it's about habitats. Because we know the Blackstairs was designated because it has a dry heathland habitat on it. Okay, so obviously, I mean.
Sorry, if you could lean into the microphone just a little bit more so people can hear you.
Yeah, we have a program of kind of reporting on a national basis on the habitats protected by Ireland for the Habitats Directive. But we don't have a programme for reporting on the condition of habitats in particular areas. For example, in the Blackstairs, you know, who's monitoring the condition of the dry heathland in the Blackstairs? That should be done. So perhaps, as part of the NPWS expansion or its work programme, we might get resources to do that, to look after the habitats. But like everyone has been saying here, there are a lot of non-legally protected habitats around the Blackstairs, which are very high biodiversity value. And when I was doing the audit here back in 2015, I was astounded by the biodiversity outside the SAC. Particularly, I'll say, the Carlow side as opposed to the Wexford side. You have to be very careful here about, political allegiances. But Carlow, it had this extraordinary amount of kind of cut over raised bog that was naturally kind of revegetating. Incredible diversity of habitats in it. The other thing which I was emphasising back then was the presence of red grouse in the Blackstairs. That a lot of people were aware of that, and they really couldn't understand why our agri-environmental scheme would not focus on that. But the focus from the national government point of view were on species protected by the Habitats Directive, and red grouse wasn't one of them. So we kind of missed that opportunity to capitalise on local interest on a species, that people really wanted to manage and improve. And of course, as someone said here, if we look after the heather and the heathland, we'll get the red grouse. So I'm delighted to hear that there's now going to be an emphasis on a survey of red grouse.
And Mary, is there a plan to redo the audit that you did in 2015? Do another audit.
I think you'd have to think, what was the purpose of this, Ella? Back in 2015, there was a great interest in the whole biodiversity of the Blackstairs, and there was no written account of anything about it. So they desperately needed a record, okay? And then there was also a possibility of developing an EIP here. So the record kind of went towards agri-environmental farming kind of analysis. So that was the purpose of the audit then. What would the purpose of the audit be now? That's the first thing you'd have to clarify. Why do an audit again now?
Stephanie, do you have a thought on that?
Well, I think, as Liam's already said, monitoring is a massive part of our knowledge around biodiversity, being able to track change over time so that we can be effective in the type of actions that we carry out. That's true in agriculture, that's true in our beautiful nature reserves, it's true everywhere for biodiversity. So I think in terms of the value of a biodiversity audit or biodiversity of monitoring over time, you can't undervalue that. We've got to be able to measure and track what's going on so that we can respond effectively. That would be my opinion.
Porrick, can I come to you? Porrick from the Irish Wildlife Trust. You were there yesterday when we went on this really fascinating trip around parts of the Blackstairs. And if I could ask you to imagine you're wearing a virtual headset and just describe what you see the potential is. Let our imaginations go there. Where do you see that potential? I mean, what are you seeing when you see the Blackstairs and when you hear what the stakeholders are all saying, which is that they love this place and they want it to be more full of life, but they want to have earn a living from it as well. But what do you think the potential is?
Yeah, it was...
Sorry, bring the microphone. Yeah.
We really had a fascinating day yesterday, and in many ways it confronts us with a lot of the paradoxes that we have when we drive around Ireland or walk, or when we look at our local areas, in that we see beautiful places and frequently we see wildlife, but we don't see what has been lost over the generations and going back into generations that aren't even with us anymore. I was struck by the young guy. He was an ornithologist, really passionate guy, who told us about the birds that he monitors.
Sorry, what was the gentleman's name? Porrick Webb, yeah, he was extraordinary.
Yeah, and he had such knowledge, but I also kind of detected a kind of a sadness in his voice about the things that he can't see. The birds that he knows were there, the curlews, the hen harriers, the corncrakes, that are just not there anymore. So, I mean, yes, we can look to the past as some kind of a hint as to what used to be there, and in some ways we don't, we know that there was an awful lot more forest historically. We know that there are animals that are just completely absent now. I mean, legend has it the last wolf was shot on Mount Leinster. So, but looking forward, we have to also acknowledge that it's not just a biodiversity crisis, we have a climate crisis, we have a water crisis. The rivers in the southeast are under tremendous pressure from pollution. They're going out to the sea. Of course, Ireland is an island and the ocean is under tremendous pressure. And so what we imagine for the future has to address all of those things. And the other thing, of course, is that we do have an inequality crisis as well. This is not just about red grouse and hen harriers. This is about the people. But of course, I got tremendous hope yesterday because, obviously there's a lot of people here who really care about this place. And there's a lot that's still worth saving. But we have to look at not just saving what we have to look at trying to restore ecosystems. I'd love to see forest ecosystems in Ireland be restored, and our rivers restoring our water quality. So I think we can try to imagine a certain abundance of life that isn't there anymore.
Laura, do you imagine how things can change? I mean, when you hear, for example, yesterday it wasn't just the wildlife expert who was saying, what is missing. It was also the farmers saying that they recognise what is missing. They're not hearing the cuckoo as often and the rest. But can you imagine a different reality in the future?
Well, I can see the seeds for this new reality in terms of. For the first time now, Ireland has a complete coverage of heritage officers. Carlow now has a new heritage officer. Wexford has a heritage officer now. We'd like to see biodiversity officers to support their work. And, through the work of these heritage officers, these people are knitting into the communities that live in the Blackstairs. They are not alone. They have the support of various staff. Hopefully now that the Parks and Wildlife Service will have better complement of staff with more resources to support them, together with the communities and the vision that they have for the places that they are living in these landscapes, together with the knowledge and expertise of specialists and ecologists and that, together we can form this vision of what we want. And, the support that they give them will hopefully germinate and action will come from that.
And yeah, I often think, we do have a very siloed system in terms of how the country is run. And that thinking kind of seeps down in all of us. But how do you find a way for this vision and a collective vision to take place? I mean, you report all over Ireland on these issues. How can you find a way that everyone can come together and see through those silos and have a collective vision and then, most critically, enact that and make it happen? I mean, it's a very general question, but you see what I'm getting at, which is how do you get over... I mean, we have, farmers who own the land and have the sense from their ancestors that they have a responsibility for that, and it's very easy to understand that. We have people now, because of the climate and biodiversity crises, they now have an increasing say over what they see should happen to the land as well. And these things can be very difficult in the conversation, but there is a way through.
There is, and it's a difficult question to answer, but one of the positives that I see in the last, let's say, 20 years since I'm working in this area, or since I'm an adult, is that, say, before there were people who were into nature conservation or looking at alternative ways of approaching how we manage our environment would kind of go off by themselves and do these projects on their own wee plots of land. And what we're seeing now, especially over the last 10 years, is more and more collective community approaches. Things even like tidy towns groups. Some of the tidy towns groups are absolutely wonderful, but Rivers Trusts is something that in particular has given me a lot of hope. So there's an Inishowen Rivers Trust, there's a Moy River Trust, there's Rivers Trusts popping up all over the country, and they tend to bring together the tidy towns group, the local farmers, a few local businesses, the local authorities. They tend to be quite collective in how they approach the issues. They're bringing in the data from the scientists. They're looking at all the different stakeholders and how they're inputting to that river, and they're looking at really positive restoration projects. Anglers as well tend to be really involved in those. There was another group that I visited last year, Loch Cara Conservation Action Group, and they were absolutely wonderful. And there was a couple of really motivated individuals locally with ecological knowledge and environmental science background who came together with local farmers, with the local authority, with the EPA, but a community-driven initiative. And I'm seeing more and more of these all over the country, and they genuinely give me hope, having travelled around and met a lot of these groups over the last 8 years. What we need to do, though, there's a very particular set of circumstances needed for an effective conservation group. You have to have somebody or a few people with a lot of knowledge and insight. You have to have some people with a fair dose of diplomacy to bring different groups on board. You have to have people who happen to have all this time on their hands. You happen to have, there's so many things have to come together. So that there's a lot of obstacles. There's too many obstacles at the moment to community groups like those I'm talking about, like the Blackstairs group here, which are also really inspiring from what I've seen in the last 24 hours. It's not easy for a group to come together like that and be effective. What we need to do now, I think, is put the supports in place and the measures in place that when a group does come together like this, that they are supported in every possible way, whether it's with the form filling, the permissions, the funding, the exposure, the local businesses coming on board to support them. There's a lot can be done, and I'm really heartened by that ground up action, that bottom up action that we're seeing more of. And that's something that I think is quite new. I mean, maybe I'm wrong, I haven't been around long enough, but I think that is quite new.
Liam, do you have anything to say on that? Because obviously you've been in touch with a lot of communities around Ireland.
Yeah, well, I think there's tremendous work to be done at the local level. And I think the interesting thing is an awful lot of the common interest is that it's done because national policy doesn't actually facilitate local needs, or very often they're fighting against national policy. I think across the board, most of the policies that impact on landscape are ones that actually have a kind of they're at a national level, they're not specific enough to bring out the characteristics of the local level. And like the EIP projects. And
just on that point, I mean, and we will have a session specifically about farming, but just on that point, it does seem that was the perspective very much communicated by the farmers yesterday as well.
Yeah, no, I think that's true. I mean, it's all national policy, and it actually does work to kind of homogenise everything. And I think the needs then from the local groups they're almost fighting against that national policy. And like the EIP is a very good, it's a fantastic programme.
Yeah, just briefly if you can, just for people who don't know it.
Okay, so basically it's, oh gosh, I shouldn't be doing this, it's someone else, but it's basically groups of local farmers can come together to address local specific issues that help conservation. And they target measures locally. It's brilliant. But in a funny way, it's a tacit admission that national agricultural policy doesn't work for local areas. And I think that's very important. So what I think we need is that Anya has mentioned, like there's community groups popping up all over the place, and they're doing brilliant work. I don't think I could do it in a voluntary capacity. But some way we have to find a mechanism where you can actually feed into the national policy, and that there's more resolution within this, this bland kind of overall policy to target the local levels. I know that sounds very general, but it's fighting against the trends, the reason these groups are coming forward. And that's the kernel, that's the key thing. How do we...
And is it possible, I mean, is it possible that mechanism comes from bottom up, or does that have to come really from the state?
I think policies have to have an element where they'll be targeted at local needs, landscape needs. How that's done is a different issue, but I think that really has to happen. I mean, agricultural policy is a key one. Each catchment, call it, has specific needs, and policies have to, in some way, be able to facilitate those needs if we're dealing with a climate and a biodiversity crisis,
Micheál, do you mind if I bring you in here? Carlow is the second smallest county in Ireland. The Blackstairs, though, have a sort of outsized role for the surrounding counties, not least from a point of view of water, where you can see the commonalities. I mean, everyone drinks water, everyone needs it, everyone should have a vested interest in the health of the Blackstairs. And I just wonder from that perspective, looking at sort of commonalities and where you can find common ground to galvanise action around the likes of the Blackstairs, that water can help in that.
Water is one of the ways, for sure, and Anya was talking about it earlier on as one of the ways in which groups are coming together. and I agree with that river trusts are important and so on. But just listen to the conversation. Rivers Trust can only do so much. The Blackstairs group that's here, the nature group, can only do so much. The thing that strikes me about the conversation so far, Ella, is we're struggling, and I think struggling is good. We're struggling basically to try and address something that Liam put his finger on right at the beginning, which is a massive policy gap. And I don't think that the local groups, whether they're the Rivers Trust or the Blackstairs groups, can actually achieve their objectives and their aims in this kind of policy limbo. And what I mean by that, just to explain what he was saying there again, is go back to this idea of islands, right? Lorcan and Alan and various people were talking about the idea that the Blackstairs is a refuge, is an oasis, is an island. And if you think about it in another way, these little local groups around the country that are trying to do stuff, such as the Blackstairs Nature Group or the Law Pro groups around the country, they're also little mini islands, but they're struggling in a sea where actually the rest of society and the project of government is going in the opposite direction. And I don't think actually that we will be able to achieve the vision for a place like the Blackstairs unless there is more coherence and synergy between this kind of local bottom-up effort, unless that is supported by national policy. Now, what does that look like? I don't have an answer. I think that today will help us a little bit. The farming session that we're going to have next is really important because Brendan Dunford and Dara and all these people are basically saying, look at these little local islands, these EIPs, there's 400 farmers here and so many farmers there, are basically little, again, refuges, but the whole policy of the country is going in the opposite direction. We have to shift the national policy. That's what it's about. Water policy and nature policy and climate policy are all being promoted separately by government departments, but actually they are fighting against the economic project of the country. And as Malcolm said at the beginning, you need to put nature, water, climate at the heart of the debate. We're beginning to do that now with climate. And there's a strong public response, both pro and con. If you do the same for nature and the same for water, it does mean limits to activity. It means changing the ways in which we're doing things. It means less drainage, etc. And you have to incentivize the change. So, like you mentioned, a very simple thing about tailoring the header, which is a lovely word. But who's going to tailor the header unless there's a reason for doing it? So you have to change the national policy. Now, I was very struck also, Ella, by just some of the sentiments. You were saying you have to feel things. We had words like hope and we had words like sadness, and I think there's also a word of frustration coming out. And frustration is a good place to start, you know, because we haven't figured out how that's going to work at a national level. But I'm hopeful that by today, at the end of today, we'll hear a little bit more how the policy ground is shifting, and in doing so, that you're not just trying to protect an SAC. Parts of wildlife can't do this on their own. Like there's 4 people per county in the country if you have 100 rangers. That's not enough. So Carlo can't do it, and Ciara and Alan and their colleagues cannot physically achieve what needs to be done because, again, they're only working on a little island. So we have to actually have a different way of thinking about the landscape of the country where nature and climate and water are actually part of the discourse of what we do with the other. 11% of Ireland is SAC. Well, what about the other 89%? We need policies for that. That's where we're going.
I mean, Anya, it is very difficult, isn't it, for a local group, for local farmers to hear that, because how do even ministers change national policy, let alone a local group who feel the urgency of what they're in?
Yeah, it's a good point, because Micheál makes a good point there in that there is only so much that local initiatives can do and community groups can do, and it's really important to engage, and there is lots that can be done. But if we look at the bigger picture, and I'm going to talk about our SACs and our SPAs, our protected area networks, because these are our rarest and most valuable ecologically habitats. 85% of the 69 habitats that were assessed are in poor status or in unfavourable or bad condition, and only 15% in favourable conservation status. Now, that is not the realm for community groups to address. That is where we need government action, we need specialists, we need ecologists working on that to support appropriate management of those habitat types. We're also looking at, I mentioned the water quality, and that almost half of our rivers and lakes and estuaries are in poor conservation status under the Water Framework Directive. Ireland is doing terribly under our nature laws, Birds Directive, Habitats Directive, Water Framework Directive. We are abysmal at delivering on our commitments on a European level to the quality of a healthy natural environment. And what we're doing instead, we have an increase in the amount of nitrogen fertilisers going on the land from 2018. From 2011 to 2018, nitrate fertilisers increased by 38%. That is absolutely massive. So while on the one hand, we know that there's so much special to protect, we know that there's so much to be done, there's so many positive actions, and yet we have this juggernaut of intensification of dairy coming down, which is really counteracting all of those positive initiatives. So there are so many pieces that we need to look at together, but that certainly is one.
Chiara, can I bring you in here from the NPWS and from everything that you've heard, particularly the points that Micheál just made? Do you have a response?
I do. I'd like
Sorry, just bring the mic. Thank you.
I'd like to start by saying how delighted I am to hear these conversations today. And that word hope, it makes me really hopeful, because I think it's really important, if we're to find the right solutions, that we identify the problems and we talk about them and we explore how we might tackle them. One of the questions, I was here yesterday and I really enjoyed the trip, and to my shame, my first ever setting foot in the Blackstairs, which gave me fresh eyes to look at it. One of the questions I was asked yesterday was, why isn't the special area of conservation bigger? Why is it here and it stops here and it's not there? And you mentioned that Article 17 report, the special area of conservation. It is a very tunnel-visioned designation on a short list of habitats and species that are rare in a European context.
Just explain briefly, if you can, why the SAC exists here.
On a European level, there are habitats and species like the hen harrier, like the blanket bog, that are critically endangered on a European level. So there's an agreement in the European Union that all countries, in relation to a specific list of habitats and species, will do their utmost to protect them as a network. It's the largest network of protected areas in the world, but it is targeted on a very specific list of habitats and species. It cannot be and should not be our only nature conservation designation. And I refer to Liam's excellent point that there is a policy blind spot of epic proportions in relation to biodiversity. And we need to be having those conversations about, is it a designation that we look for, or is it a high nature value farming approach that we look for? I mean, the kinds of biodiversity things that were brought up yesterday were to which the SAC is blind, are the hedgerows that are lower down on the stretching down into the lowlands, the hill farms and the value that they support, the cuckoos, the river headwaters, and the SAC is blind to lots of the value that there is in the Blackstairs. And we even had conversations yesterday about wider heritage value. People talked about the possibility that there's a huge number of unrecorded prehistoric monuments. They talked about the historic landscape and the walls and other features that are unprotected by any kind of heritage designation. They talked about a pilgrimage route. There was a conversation about the working dogs, which is a cultural heritage. And there was, even when we were sitting having our coffee, there were people passed by and talked about how their ancestors were buried in the cemetery there. We need to be having these conversations. Today is about biodiversity, but biodiversity doesn't exist. It exists in synergy with the community that is there, and with the cultural heritage, and with the historic heritage that's there. And we need to have those conversations and imagine different solutions. The solutions that we have now won't deliver all that this community needs in order for the Blackstairs uplands to be the environment in which they live and which supports them and which they support.
One thing that was very clear yesterday, the farmers in particular were saying there's just too many agencies, there's too many departments involved, and everything is just falling through the cracks, and you say someone says yes, someone says no, all the rest. In a very sort of simplistic, practical way, is there, from a policy point of view, a need for one agency to manage all of this? Like, from the tangible point of view, in terms of where you see the gaps are and what needs to happen, what is that ask, given you've got a minister behind you?
I'm not sure I'm ready to answer that question on the one agency, but I hugely sympathise with the farmers and the bureaucracy and the administration that they encounter when they're trying to deliver not just an income for themselves, but biodiversity solutions, which is, ethically, I hats off to them. And the Blackstairs Farming Futures is one of these EIP pilot projects. And I was saying to one of the farmers yesterday, you could regard the whole EIP effort as in itself a pilot project on an Irish level to see if this is the way to go. Locally led schemes targeted at the biodiversity in that area. So I think that I would hope that in review of those pilot projects, and I would really hope that Blackstairs Farming Future project continues, that there's also a review of, well, what were the challenges for those farmers in delivering those projects? And the administration is undoubtedly a challenge, and they need, I suppose, champions in the various departments to help them to unlock that administration, because every system has its rules, which generates administration and bureaucracy, but that shouldn't be the challenge that they're facing in delivering biodiversity gain.
We have about 10 minutes. Thank you, Chiara. We have about 10 minutes left. We can take questions online, but also here. Please, can you keep your questions short and to the point? And if you're okay with it, tell us who you are, and please stand up when you're talking. Yes. If you can stand up there so people can see you. Thanks.
Hi, thanks. I'm Elaine from Montashka. It's really fantastic to hear the energy.
Speak as loud as you can.
The energy of the community group here. But just from a practical point of view, in Montashka, weekly, I think this microphone on. Thanks very much. Sorry, that was a little loud. In Antashka Weekly, we'll get emails from community groups and individuals telling us about these amazing habitats and all of the species in them. And there's some development proposed, and asking me what they can do to stop that. And I have to tell those people, unless we can link it to a directive like the Habitats Directive or the Water Framework Directive, it's not going to be protected. And it breaks my heart. So I guess my point is just, it's amazing to have this ground-up approach, but we really need to make sure we don't lose that energy, because these people are losing their habitats they care about. Organisations like Antashka are powerless to help, and the government, from these communities' point of view, don't seem to really care. So just, it kind of ties together a lot of comments from the speakers, but we really need a massive policy shift to address this.
Okay, thank you. And I'm not going to speak for the Minister, but I presume he would very much say he does care, and that's expressed in the government. Does anyone else have any questions? Yes, Paddy. Wait for the mic, thank you.
Paddy Woodworth, and writer. I'm really struck. I think the positive energy here today is wonderful, and I hate to throw something really negative into it, but the most frightening piece of news I've seen in years locally was the poll in the Irish Times 10 days ago, which showed massive opposition to every significant climate measure among the general population. And I think that tells us all that we've just got to do so much more work outside our own bubbles, outside our own circles, because I knew there was opposition, but I had no idea that it was this big. I don't know, I mean, it's just one poll, but I don't know if other people saw that, but the figures were really scary.
Thank you, Paddy. I think there was a certain amount of controversy about it because of the way those questions were framed. I don't know if anyone on the panel would like to pick up on that, and whether, briefly, yes.
Yeah, briefly, I didn't see that, but there was something that I came across recently, which is a European Commission poll of attitudes towards biodiversity, awareness around biodiversity, and Ireland came out really, really strongly in that. I had some notes. It's a barometer on public awareness and education on biodiversity, not on climate change, but 59% of Irish respondents consider the decline and reduced variety of natural habitats to be a very serious problem. 59%, I mean that's good going. And we had the largest increase in Europe, up by 6 percentage points to 76% of the proportion of respondents who totally agree with the statement that we have responsibility to look after nature. So I found that really, really heartening. It's contradictory to what the information you've offered. Another thing that came through in that poll is that there was a very low understanding of the requirements of nature conservation. So a lot of people care deeply and feel that we have a strong obligation to look after nature, but don't understand how that actually works.
Anyone else on the panel like to comment before we move to the next question? Yeah, Neil.
In response to Paddy Woodworth, I would not be surprised in a way at the data from the Irish Times poll, and in a way it kind of echoes something that was written recently by George Monbiot in the Guardian. He was talking about climate change, and that in effect all of the surveys and data that he has seen says that it's like St. Augustine, make me chaste but not just yet. In other words, that when it's kind of just a generic question, are you in favour of climate change and action and all that, people will say yes. But if it actually comes to affecting their own individual livelihood, whatever that is, driving a car is the simple one, and so on like that, all of the other actions, the farmers' actions and so on, as soon as it begins to hurt economically, then you come into opposition. And that will be the actual Achilles heel of climate action, and that the only way that you overcome that is, unfortunately, with government mandates. So I think it's different, Paddy, between climate and water or climate and nature. And I agree with what Anya has said there. And the difference is that actually local communities can see nature or see that it's disappearing. They can see water and see either it's pea green, soup in an estuary in West Cork, or it's clean. And so it's more possible, to my mind, in Ireland, because we're still very connected to the land and to where we come from, no matter where we are, whether we're in the city or the country. Ella, we were talking about this yesterday evening, feels this kind of connection. We all do with the land. So therefore, I would be more hopeful about the possibility of local action. It still needs policy support. It needs a different approach to agriculture in the country. But there is more potential for action locally to protect nature or restore nature, to protect water, than actually there is about climate, just because climate by definition isn't somewhere or another out there, intangible. And so government has more work to do, I think, in terms of designing levers for climate, which will not be popular, for sure, but it can nurture more of the actions locally by citizens. Of course, we have to incentivise, climate policies about cars and all the rest of it, but I think it's going to be less easy to do it. So I'm not surprised at all at your comment there from the paper, but I'd be more optimistic that we can make progress in an area like the Blackstairs if you redesign, so that, as Ciara said, you're not just talking about protecting within the SSE. There has to be a new form of incentive for farming, which, to use the phrase, makes sense to have the heather left there or to restore it. And Brendan and others will talk about that in a while.
Absolutely, and we have amazing examples, which Brendan will talk about in the Burren. We also have the example of the Bride project, where actually the results have not only been positive in terms of climate and biodiversity, but also community and well-being, and the identity of farmers and a sort of widening of their role as well. Rosemary, did you have a question? We'll have coffee soon, everyone.
Yep, Rosemary from Blackstairs Nature, Rosemary Rooney. I've actually a question from our online audience. It's about ash dieback, specifically about ash dieback. Obviously, it's having a devastating impact on our countryside in general, but in particular on our hedgerows. So does anybody have any kind of solutions or suggestions or answers?
I can't say forestry or trees are my area of expertise on.
I can say something.
Yeah, Anya.
In terms of solutions, I don't know that there is one, but 80%, I've done a lot of hedgerow surveys up and down the country, 80% of our hedgerow trees are ash. And we are going to lose about 90% of our ash trees over the next 10 years. I did say that statistic to an NPWS ecologist I spoke with recently, who said that's an optimistic assessment. So we're going to lose almost all of our ash trees over the next 10 years. I don't think there is a solution. Maybe Kieran will talk about this later. Other than we have to make sure that we recruit other young native trees, birch, alder, oak, so many different wonderful native species that are just going to have to take the place of the ash trees in the hedgerows and in the woods.
Okay, thank you. Briefly, last question, and then I want to ask the panellists a final question.
Sorry, I'm Mairead Phelan, Irish Country Women's Association, and I'm just looking at biodiversity and EIP, the European Investment Programme.
Sorry, could you speak up a tiny bit?
I'm just Mairead Phelan from the ICA. I'm just thinking about all of the loss of biodiversity and how it happens. And an awful lot of the time it happens by mistake because people don't know what they're doing. And then it's only when after it happens that somebody has said, oh, you did something wrong there. You know, is there something in the EIP programme where there's a huge education programme for schools so that people that are walking to schools, that are going on buses, acknowledge the biodiversity that's in the hedges on the way to schools and acknowledge the countryside that they're living in and get to understand it? So I think, there has to be a ground bottom up and top down as well.
Completely, and we were talking about this last night about the nature table. Yeah. Alan, do you have any thoughts on that in particular with regards to education? I mean, the EIPs in themselves are an education for all of us who learn about them, for the people involved in them, but I mean, this point is so important, which is from an early age.
I think education is a two-way swing there, because we get educated by the farmers to a large degree, and we advise the farmers in the best way through ecologists and so on. So it's very much a reciprocal thing.
And it's about listening, isn't it? Can I finish? I don't want to be sort of falsely positive, but I think it's only fair to reflect the energy that we felt yesterday with the farmers and all the stakeholders, and also the energy of what this day is about, to ask the panellists to give us a key action point and be as specific as you can, because at the end of the day, as I sort of described it as an ideas mel, I mean, we want to be able to come out of here with a sense of inspiration and ideas. So can I start with Stephanie briefly, and then we'll all go for coffee?
I suppose for me, it would be on a ground level. I think kind of touching on some of the things we've been talking about. If you want to do something yourself to help biodiversity and to address these crises that we're in, go out and get to know what's around you. Start to look at the hedgerows, start to look at the flowers, start to look at what's flying in your garden, in your local park, or wherever you are in the country. Get to know it, get familiar with it.
And then send the data to Liam.
And absolutely send the data to Liam.
Thank you, Lord.
Well, I'd like to send out the message that, for the Blackstairs Nature Group, they're not alone. There's lots of support. I mean, the room full of experts, specialists that are here today show you, that there's a lot of people who really want to help you to find the solutions that you're looking for. Use your heritage officers, use your National Parks and Wildlife Service, Quiltia, and people are all managing this land, but they want it to work. We all want progress. We want to listen to the farmers, to their concerns, to seek solutions for them. It may feel like you're dealing with bureaucracy all the time, but there are lots of people out there. If you come together with them and get them to listen to your problems, get them to get involved, solutions are there for you.
And I presume a biodiversity action plan from Carlow County Council would help.
Massively.
Hint, hint, that's it, Liam.
Yeah, I just think, unlike with the climate issue, I think there's a huge opportunity around the messaging around biodiversity.
Take your mask off.
Sorry? Yeah. Unlike the climate, I think there's huge opportunities around the messaging around biodiversity. We need to talk to people about, we want fish back in our rivers, we want the eels, we want to be able to grow fruit in our gardens, we want clean water. So those are the simple messages. That's what it's all about. And I think that's what the focus actually should be about. And all of the other stuff, SACs and things, has to be put in the back. It's technocratic conservation. We need messaging around biodiversity. Keep it simple, relatable to people, and there's an opportunity we'll get support for it.
Anya.
Yeah, picking up on what all the contributors have said so far, there's a strong connection between love and awe and wonder for nature and action. When we only hear about the losses and the dire situation that we're in, people go away and they watch something on Netflix and they don't want to know about it. So I would say as an action to try and connect with your community, organise a wee event with friends or family, go out, gather up rose hips or something, do a nature walk in your area, connect, celebrate, take joy from nature and do that in a collective way. And that's the kind of, there's a lot of writing on psychology now that the best response to climate anxiety is connecting with nature. So that makes us feel good about ourselves and our place with nature, and it helps us to connect with our communities. And that's where real, positive, genuine action comes from.
Thank you. Alan, we're nearly there.
I think in addition to what everyone has contributed, I think education is key. I think if we can get the education message through the schools and so on, then the schools will bring it back to the parents will listen to what's being discussed by because they are going to inherit all this in the future, so I think it's important to get that through to the schools.
Thank you. Chiara?
I could spend a very long time talking about all the things I'd love to see.
Coffee is waiting, so I think everyone will get very angry with you if you do that.
I would love the conversation on wider nature conservation value and how we protect it to happen.
Thank you. Mary?
Okay, a lot of the conversation to me resonates with regard to biodiversity action plans, you know, the kind of actions we're talking about. But what I think specifically in the Blackstairs could be useful is the establishment of a kind of a wildlife group for the area, where people come together and go for walks and be with people who know more than they do about the plants or the birds or the bees, etc. So set up a local wildlife study group, okay, where people could continue to meet and have these conversations.
That's a very good suggestion. Finally, Pork.
You asked to be very specific, so my one specific action that I would do in the morning is take the food plan that was published this year, which is an enormously important and influential plan, and I would put it in the bin. And I would come up with a new plan that acknowledges land and sea use alongside food, and that will address our climate, our biodiversity, our water and our inequality crises at the same time.
Thank you very much. Before we thank the panel, I just want to say we're going to have coffee. And when you hear the bell ring, the cowbell ring, please can you all immediately, like cows, come straight back in so that we can get going again. But first, can you just please thank the panellists for such an engaging session? All right, everyone, we're going to get going. Hello, can we sit down, please? No, once you sit down, it's fine. You can take them off. Thank you, everyone. I need a glass. I don't want to. No to... People always respond to that. It's great. Okay, thank you very much, everyone. We're going to get going because we don't want to be delayed and we also don't want to have a rushed conversation. So welcome back, and I hope you had a nice coffee. And we're going to enter the next session now. Before we do, we have a local ecologist called Brian Power, and he runs, if any of you are on Facebook, I'd encourage you to go there, Wild Carlo. And Rosemary Rooney of the Blackstairs group said it's a kind of love letter to nature and life in the area. So we're going to take a look at that now.
Hi folks, and welcome to this Blackstairs Biodiversity Showcase. My name is Brian Power. I'm from Kildavin, just over the road, and I'm going to run you through some of the highlights and species I've seen in the Blackstairs in my time recording there. I'm going to give you a quick overview of some of the habitats first off, and then we'll progress from there. The Blackstairs Mountains are a special area of conservation designated under the EU Habitats Directive. These are designated for two main habitat types, European dry heath and North Atlantic wet heath. Several other semi-natural habitats occur in the area, including dry humid acid grassland, small pockets of bog, and a number of flushes. Surrounding land use includes improved grassland, conifer plantations, and in some cases arable land. The first group I'm going to take a look at today is that of birds, and most of these will be associated with the uplands. So the first bird I'm going to look at is the snipe, which is a master of camouflage and is usually associated with wetter areas in the mountain. It is amber listed as a breeding species, and numbers in winter are bolstered by birds from abroad. Next up, we're going to take a look at the golden plover. This is a red listed breeding species in Ireland. Its breeding status in the Blackstairs is unknown, but it winters in the area in small numbers. The next species I'm going to take a look at is the hen harrier. This is a bird regularly associated with uplands, as this is its breeding range. Breeding status in the Blackstairs is currently unknown, and the bird is most often encountered in the Blackstairs on passage. I'm going to stick with the bird of prey theme now, and the next species I'm going to look at is kestrel. Kestrel is a bird regularly associated with the Blackstairs and upland habitats, where it can be seen hovering along roadside verges or over fields and pasture. The species has undergone decline in recent years and is now amber listed. This next species is a bird called the meadow pipit and is one of the most frequently encountered birds in the Blackstairs where it breeds. However, it has undergone long-term population declines, and for this reason it has become a red listed species. I'm going to jump back to birds of prey now, and this is a merlin, one of our smallest birds of prey. Not much bigger than a blackbird. It's a scarce bird in the Blackstairs, and it is an amber listed breeding species. This little bird is called a snow bunting. Snow buntings winter in Ireland in small numbers. This bird was photographed on the road to the summit of Mount Leinster. The next species up is a windchat. They're a scarce breeding species in Ireland and are red listed due to severe declines. To my knowledge, there's only one breeding location in the Blackstairs. The last species I'm going to look at that breeds in the Blackstairs is the yellowhammer. This species has undergone a massive range contraction in recent decades due to changes in farming practices, particularly a lack of cereal crop production. In the Blackstairs, it's still found reasonably frequently where arable land meets areas of scrub and upland. This kind of provides a good mix of both breeding habitat and food for the species. For the final section on birds, I'm going to move away from resident breeding species and wintering species to species on migration. The Blackstairs and adjoining river valleys provide a navigational throughway for many species, And the most spectacular of these that can be seen are of Hooper swans and of Greenland white-fronted geese. I filmed the following video in spring 2015 of Greenland white-fronted geese migrating north over Kildavin. It's one of several groups that were seen at the time passing through and were noted going north by several people. Now I'm going to take a look at some of the flora of the Blackstairs. Most of this is associated with the heathland habitats and some of the boggier areas. The first plant I'm going to take a look at is a plant called a bog orchid. It's a stunning little flower, but it's only about 5 centimetres tall and can be very, very difficult to locate. To my knowledge, there's only one location in Carlow, and that's found in the Blackstairs. It's a floral protection order species. I believe it took us something like 5 years to find this species at a known site. Species is fir club moss. It's on one of the appendixes for the Habitats Directive. It's a very distinctive bottle brush shaped plant. And then we have some cranberry, which is found in some bog areas in the Blackstairs, known from Ballycrystal in particular. The next species up is a plant called roundleaf sundew. While most people have heard of Venus flytraps, this is our version of it. Roundleaf sundew is a carnivorous plant. The glistening areas on the plant are a sticky substance which attracts and captures flies, and then the plant slowly emits enzymes which digest it. Next up, we have a plant called pale butterworth. This species is found in similar habitats to roundleaf sundew in damper areas, and like the roundleaf sundew, the basal leaves of this plant are also carnivorous. The next species we're going to look at is ling. This is one of the heathers, and it forms a dominant part of the landscape of the Blackstairs during the latter part of the summer, where it becomes incredibly visible. This photo also demonstrates the importance of the plant to insect life. This is a heather shield bug, which is associated with the plant. This is a species that's only been recently recorded in the Blackstairs. It's not known if this is from under recording or range expansion. The final plant we're going to take a look at is Devil's Bit scabious, and this is a very important pollinator plant during the latter part of the summer for a variety of bees and hoverflies. It is also the larval food plant of the marsh fritillary butterfly and of the narrow-bordered beehawk moth. So this will lead nicely into the next slides of vertebrate life, where I'll talk a bit more about the marsh fritillary. The next group I'm going to take a look at here is the invertebrate life found in the Blackstairs. The Blackstairs hosts a wide variety of butterflies, bees, wasps, many other species that I'm not going to touch on. I'm only going to take a look at some species of interest to myself here, or species that have some conservation status concern. I'm going to start off by looking at the marsh fritillary butterfly, a bit of its history in Carlow, and then move on to some others. The marsh fritillary is the only insect species in Ireland listed on Annex 2 of the European Habitats Directive. The first photo in this slideshow is of the larval web of marsh fritillary butterfly. The butterfly lays its eggs on Devil's Bit scabious, and the larvae feed solely on the leaves of this, often in communal webs. Prior to 2014, there were only historical breeding records of the species in Carlow, and despite adults being recorded at a location in the Blackstairs. Targeted monitoring of this area and subsequently of similar types of habitat has led to the discovery of the species in several areas in the Blackstairs. The marsh fritillary relies on metapopulation, which usually involves several sites being linked in order for the species to survive. Next up, we have a green hair streak butterfly, which is another very striking butterfly, but is only a little bit larger than the size of a thumbnail. It's usually associated with damper areas in Blackstairs. And then next up, after that, we have the larva of the emperor moth, which is rather striking, as is the adult of this species. This is a species of conopid fly called Zodian cinereum, which I discovered in the Blackstairs last spring during lockdown. The species had previously only been recorded once in Ireland in the 1950s from Monaghan. Subsequent searches of the Blackstairs has led to the discovery of an established population in the area. Next up, I'm going to take a look at some bees. This is Bombus monticola, the mountain bumblebee, which has a restricted range in Ireland but is listed of least concern and is found in a couple of locations in the Blackstairs. Next up, we're going to take a look at a solitary bee. This solitary bee is called Sphecodes gibbus, and I happened on this during first lockdown in 2020. It happens to be critically endangered but has been found at a couple of locations in the Blackstairs. For the last section of this presentation, I'm going to take a look at some of the mammal species found in the Blackstairs. The Blackstairs holds a wide variety of mammal fauna, from multiple bat species to pygmy shrews, red squirrels, pine martens, some non-native species such as sika deer and the recently colonised greater white-toothed shrew, but also some of our more iconic species such as the European river otter pictured here, which can be found in most streams in the area and ventures into the uplands at times to feed on frogs. And finally, we have an Irish mountain hare, which can be found throughout the range. Thank you for taking time to view this slideshow and listening. I hope it's been informative, and I hope it inspires some of you to get out and record what you can in your local areas. This is by no means an exhaustive list of what can be found and is only barely touching on some of the things I've seen in the Blackstairs throughout my time in the area.
Thank you, Brian. Amazing stuff, thank you. And if you're watching, Brian, thank you very much for putting that together and to give a real indication of the species that share the landscape, or that we share the landscape with. So we're going to go into the next session, and it's on farming and the environment, looking at the local picture, but also the national picture. And we have a really superb panel for you, starting with Hannah Quinn Mulligan, who is a farmer and a journalist farming down in Limerick. Dr. Brendan Dunford, who's an ecologist and manager of the Burren programme down in Clare. We have Dr. Dara O'Houlihan, a senior research officer in Teagasc. Martin Shannon, who is a farmer, and he's the chairman of the Blackstairs Farming Group. And we also have with us here in the front panel Niall Ryan of the Department of Agriculture, Mairead Phelan from the Irish Countrywomen's Association. We have Maura Ryan, who is a local sheep farmer, and again, Dr. Mary Tubridy, environmental consultant. Martin, we've heard about the wildlife there. Tell us a little bit, if you can, for people who don't know the Blackstairs, the number of farmers, what kind of farming goes on in the Blackstairs Mountain?
Yeah, there's about 450 farmers, roughly, not an exact figure, in the Blackstairs commonage land. And there's 44 or 5 individual commonages in that range. Now, the type of farming goes on is, I suppose, over the years there was mixed farming, sheep, cattle, and some tillage on the lower land. But now it's gone more, I suppose, either suckler herds or sheep farmers. Very little tillage in the Blackstairs. And regarding the change that has taken place over the years, I suppose, would be, would be that there'd be a lot less people farming in the Blackstairs than there were originally, due to the change in lifestyles and education. People moved on to different things, but nevertheless, there's still a lot of people making their living in the Blackstairs, and the people who live in it, I suppose it'd be fair to say that they love the Blackstairs. You know, they look after the animals. And I was just looking at the introductory sketch there, and one of the bigger issues we'd have in the Blackstairs, I suppose, at the moment would be wildfires, where they do away with all that life that you cannot see in anywhere. You know, when you walk out in the mountain, you won't be down looking for small insects and that. They're all done away with in that type of situation. But on top of all that what we in the the BFF, the Blackstairs Farming Futures, which I implementation officer for that, is that the coming together of the communities is very important, and I'd like to compliment the people here today. It's an excellent turnout and very well put together and very informative, and will be seen to be so, and that's as it should be. You know, that people come together like this and discuss these various issues that's going on. It was said in the earlier panel, I know I'm slightly going away from your question, but in the earlier panel, how do you deal, or how do you come together? What do you do to actually, you know, the talking has to stop and work has to commence. But
can I just ask you, what's it like to have a broader number of people in society start to look at the land and ask bigger questions of it? So historically, I think it's fair to say, in the not too distant past, farmers were left off. But with the kind of crises that we're in now, more people are interested and want to have a say in what you're doing. Now, what is that like for farmers?
Well, okay, where I live in the centre of the Blackstairs, just at the foot of Mount Leinster, really, just right in the centre on the Carlow-Wexford border. My land goes right to the Wexford border. I could be the last farmer in Carlow or the first farmer in Carlow, as the case may be. But nevertheless, we see a massive change now with people hill walking. I could have maybe 50 cars parked at the end of our laneway up to the mountain, walking the mountains. How do we deal with that? We deal with it fairly well. They're all nice people. The majority of people come to do those hill walking are, you know, just people out for the air and the change and so on. You know, we're not against anyone coming to the area at all. I think it's important. The mountains are for everybody. They're not just for me. But we are the people who have to, you have a garden at the back and people can drive by your garden and admire it, but you have to maintain it. And without those people in that area doing that work, it's impossible, I'd say, to make any change. You said there that we were never involved in anything before. It was just carried on regardless from the top down. I'm not against from the top down. Certain guidance have to come. We in the BFF engaged with Dr. Mary Tuberty initially. My first learning on this was from Dr. Brendan Dunford down we went to the board to see how they were implementing the programme, that they're a great programme entirely. I was in Kerry during the week and looking at what the devastation was done there to the fire in the national park and so on. But we all need to learn and know more. I definitely in favour of all that.
And finally, just to get a kind of picture from the farmers, if it's possible to say this, the future is part of your title. What is the future that you see? Like, what is the vision that you see in terms of the potential?
The future for me, anyway, would be that we carry on what we've been doing in the locally led schemes, whereby that the coming together of people, and this is evolving now, even to what we're here today. When we started out first, we were on our own. And we saw what they done in the Burn and so on, and how they came together. And I heard Brendan saying that in the early days, that the coming together of people, you can do nothing on your own. And the wider community getting into it like now, I think is good. That's the way it's required. That's what's required. And coming up with some plan that Michael, I think, said there earlier on, that can be put enacted. Talk is fine, but we need to have something that can be enacted. And to do that, I think we all have to sit down in a circle again at some stage, but I think we'd need to do it more often. And one of the bigger problems we'd have in our operation would be we getting clearances from the Department of the Environment to actually do work that a trained ecologist has identified needs to be done. Remove some particular invasive species that doesn't need to be there. And we cannot get that clearance. It takes forever and it's the latter end of the year before we can actually implement that work on account of that problem. So things like that needs to be sorted out, I think, and what Michael was saying in that regard, I think is very, very important, that we need to, I think, form some sort of a panel that would be able to, you know, if I pick up a phone and I ring somebody in authority somewhere to do something like that, I'm a single person. But if it comes from a body of people, you'll get a response.
Okay.
And I think that's important, stuff like that.
Thank you. And of the 420 farmers, there's about 5 women farmers. Maura, you are one. Can I ask you briefly, Maura, what did you make of the session this morning? And you were there yesterday. You very kindly turned up and explained to us who were there about what's going on. But can we just get your sense as a farmer of where you see all of this going? Because obviously, we have the Blackstairs group, we have the sort of environmental pressures and the urgency and all the rest. Meanwhile, you're farming day to day.
Yeah. Yes, I'm farming day to day on the mountain. And I suppose I've learned a lot here this morning, and even just looking at Brian's video there, I'm like, oh my God, I'm seeing all these things every day, taking pictures of them every day, and you don't even realise what they are. And I suppose you're going out there on your own just thinking, how am I going to make a difference? Just as Martin said there, how am I going to change the world myself? But it's lovely to see everybody coming together and making a plan for the future and hopefully changing things around.
And thank you. And Hannah, you're a farmer, you're also a journalist. You were there yesterday. What were your impressions of where you see the kind of, should we say the key challenges? Because I think it was very interesting to hear what people have to say, particularly the farmers yesterday.
Yeah, it was definitely very, very interesting. I think, cheers, Brendan. I think a huge part of it was that farmers want to do so much more in terms of, Chiara mentioned it earlier from the NPWS, that farmers want more SAC land. They can't understand why some sections are SAC and other sections aren't SAC. And Maura touched upon something there as well. And actually, can we just give Minister Malcom Noonan a huge round of applause for a minute, because he managed to get the funding back for the NPWS, and I think that deserves credit. Because it is really not an easy thing to do. And on my own farm in Limerick, it's a small farm, and like Maura, I would be going out every single day and I'd be seeing these butterflies, I'd be seeing grass indicator species. Anja talked about, grassland being a huge habitat. And I didn't know what I was seeing, but we got into the NPWS farm plan scheme this year, and it's the first time I've ever had an advisor walk around with me on the farm and compliment what we were doing. Compliment our massive hedgerows, point to indicator species going, oh my God, you have orchids, oh my God, you have devil's bit scabious, have you seen the marsh fritillary? And I was like, oh, well, I might have, quietly going on Google and having a look, that kind of thing. And, I'm doing that down in Limerick, but I can see that happening in the Blackstairs as well. And what we need to talk about now then, in the context of the next Common Agricultural Policy coming up and our own national plan, is how we're going to pay farmers for that. Because the farmers, they're a little bit defensive, and I understand that as well as a farmer and everything that's going on in the media. But, if we think of the Common Agricultural Policy, and it was primarily made in response to World War II as a cheap food policy, because there was still rationing going on at that stage. We needed as much food for a growing population. And now, arguably, we're facing another huge crisis, or in the middle of a huge crisis in terms of climate change. And I really feel very passionately that farmers are part of that solution. But turning around and walloping farmers over the head and telling them what they're doing is wrong, or that what is happening on the Blackstairs or the way that things are going is wrong. So, before we thought of an agricultural unit of production as just productive farming, as just producing milk or producing meat, if we're producing clean air, if we're producing biodiversity, what I heard from the farmers yesterday was that they want those measures to be acknowledged, and then in terms that they need to be paid for them as well. So it's rethinking that unit of production in terms of what is agriculture producing now.
And it's a really interesting point in terms of changing the definition of what it is to be a farmer. And I know, Brendan, you can speak very well on that. Before we do that, Dara, can I just pick up on something that Hannah said there, which is about how farmers look at their fields and how they think about their fields. And I was minded a couple of years ago, I was in Sligo at a results-based pilot. And one of the farmers said to me, Ella, he was in sort of what they call the dreadful word marginal land, and there was nothing marginal about it, it's just the way, the kind of language we use, but he said, for all of my life, I've been told that land is useless. And then someone comes along and says, we're going to reward you for biodiversity, and it's the first time that I've ever been told that is your best field. Yeah. And it was a really telling moment in terms of how we generally speak about land and how farmers are told to feel about their land. And that actually what he was understanding was this piece of land is unbelievable.
Yeah.
And the importance of that in terms of what Hannah has just said in addressing these really critical, urgent crises.
So I agree with you. The language that we've been using has been incorrect. So uses of marginal land, disadvantaged areas of natural.
We need to retire it, I think.
I think, building on what some of the others have said, we need to start appreciating the value of these HNV areas and these upland systems. And there's different ways of doing it. We need to highlight the value to policymakers and identify with policymakers some of the challenges that are associated with managing these areas. We need to demonstrate to the wider society the value of these systems from an environmental point of view, from an economic point of view, but also from a social point of view at these smaller landscapes. And then we need to identify and support landowners in relation to valuing these systems themselves, the 30% of the landscape that is HNV. And once we start identifying the value, then we can start looking towards how do we manage these systems appropriately and provide resources for those who are managing these systems. So get more information in relation to the multiple ecosystem services that these landscapes can produce. And if they're not excelling maybe with production services, they are excelling in relation to biodiversity or carbon sequestration and water quality. And start identifying where there are trade-offs and synergies between these multifunctional ecosystem services. We need to start improving our dissemination activities. How do we share our management knowledge, learning from the likes of Brendan and his group down in the Burren, and explore different dissemination techniques, as opposed to always relying on the same few dissemination techniques that we use. And then we also need to start training those who are disseminating. If it is advisors, if it is researchers going out, ensure that there's more appreciation of managing uplands, managing HNV areas in our agricultural courses, in our colleges, in our third level institutes, or also supporting the landowners who are demonstrating, these champion farmers, supporting them with dissemination of their message. And then once we've ticked those two boxes, which are pretty big boxes, but we're building on strong foundations here for 20 years of these HNV approaches and EIP approaches, then we need to start looking at how do we add value to these systems. And obviously one way of adding value is looking through policy, such that policy starts supporting these systems and starts incentivising the deliverable of multiple ecosystem services. But if we rely exclusively on policy, you're leaving yourself exposed. So then we need to start exploring other avenues of adding value, such as marketing or branding or something like that. So we've had 20 years, 25 years of agri-environment schemes, but you could never buy a pint of Reps milk or a pound of Reps beef. So we need to start looking at branding some of these HNV produce. If I can go into my local shop and buy Azuki beans from Azerbaijan, why can't I buy Blackstairs beef? And then, so there's the adding market and there's the policy element. And then we need to start looking at alternative and supporting synergistic enterprises, such as Martin was saying with hill walkers and things like that. Start tapping into this resource of more people coming to enjoy our landscapes. Start tapping into these avenues now, as we've seen with lockdown and things like that. Looking at exploring such as tourism, looking at tapping into markets such as, I don't know, adventure races where there's rich middle-aged men going through a midlife crisis with disposable money. Start tapping into that in relation to adding value to these systems.
Yeah, and I mean, hand gliding is a really big thing here. We got a real sense of also from the farmers yesterday how enthused they are about the idea of getting more people on the mountains to enjoy it. Dara, just briefly, if you can, for people who don't know what high nature value farmland is, can you just describe it?
Well, there's better people than me here who can describe it, but it's systems such as those in the Blackstairs that are high in ecological value and that are dependent on the management of that area. So it's typically in some of the upland areas, it's small, marginal land that is delivering a high amount of ecosystem services. So it is more extensively managed. So some of the commonage areas of the Blackstairs, and again, we've undertaken work with GMIT and others in relation to this. It's about 30% of the land cover of Ireland. A lot of it is upland, but it's dependent, the systems that are there for the ecology that is there is dependent on the ongoing sensitive management that the landowners are undertaking in those regions.
Okay, and so there's a lot of, when you talk, we need to do this is what we need to do in the future. And what we have in Ireland is the model of it having happened for the last 2 decades in the Burren, thanks to the farmers down in the Burren and also Dr. Brendan Dunford. Brendan, one of the farmers, Michael Davern, said to me, agriculture is a big ship, and a big ships are very hard to turn around, but Brendan managed to do it, which is astonishing because what he says is correct. Agriculture is a very big ship. Can you, for people who don't know exactly what you did do, describe what you saw when you went down to the Burren as a young ecologist and what you realised was the potential there.
Yeah, thanks, Ellen. Also, thanks to the organisers for the invitation. It's fantastic to be here. But, you know, a big ship requires a whole crew, and I'm not even the captain. Michael Davern, the man that you mentioned, the local farm, he's the captain, Martin, as you'd recognise as well. So I suppose we're fortunate in the sense that we've been at it for 20 years and we have a really, really strong and wonderful project. But I think what sometimes we overlook about the Burn programme is the amount of learnings that we've harvested over time. What's it like working with farmers? What's it like paying for ecosystem services? What's it like in terms of facilitating all the administration around that? So we've a lot of learnings, and we're happy to share it with anybody at any time. I suppose the first step with all of these things, Ella, is just listening. It's really taking the opportunity to listen, particularly to the local perspective. Sometimes we go in there all guns blazing, criticising farmers, especially for what they did, and sometimes they're well deserved, that criticism, don't get me wrong. But I think it's more instructive to understand why they did what they did, and then to do something to address that.
So I understand that when you went down there, I don't know if this is true or not, that you spent a lot of time in pubs with farmers.
I'm afraid it was cups of tea.
Cups of tea. So what were you hearing at that time? What were the farmers saying to you?
Well, I think there was a kind of a frustration, such as there is today as well, around this whole environmental thing. In the Burn, they had SSEs designated. They felt land on top of them from nowhere. And now I think the SSEs have been really important, don't get me wrong, but farmers felt that the control which they cherished with regard to looking after the land had been taken from them. There was a national scheme called REPS, which was introduced, which flew in the face of farming traditions in the Burn. So farmers were kind of furious about being kind of told what to do. And lesson number one, don't tell a farmer what to do. Ask him what needs to be done. I think it's a much better way around it. But I think there was a frustration at the time, and I think so I'd go into a farm and I'd be thinking, this guy, like, he's wrecked the place. What's going on here? And you'd have a conversation, maybe several conversations with him to understand what happened here. And look, I was advised to do it at the time. I was given a grant to do it. My neighbours are doing it, and I'm a farmer. And the more stock I keep, there's only one market for that. So all of those things, you gain an understanding, and you gain an understanding of what you need to turn that around. You need to create new markets for these ecosystem services. You need to provide better research and advice which reflects the needs of the area. And you need to bring those people on board. I think a lot of farmers felt that they didn't have a voice anymore. So the first thing was listening. And I think for us the second phase was bringing farmers back into the story, because places like the Burn, books upon books and PhDs written about biodiversity and archaeology, never a word with the farmer. So the farmers, I think, felt a little bit stupid, like we don't have a voice here, and if we have a voice, there's too many experts to shout us down. So we wrote a little book called Farming and the Burn, which I think for farmers, they were so proud of that, the fact that their story is being told to the world, and they felt that they were part of the solution and not part of the problem. And we set up, Anne and I, a little thing called Burn Bio, the living burn, to tell the world about the importance of farming within the landscape. It's part of the biodiversity. So those are the foundational steps. And then it came to great local leadership. This farmer you mentioned, he said, look, you know, there's all these threats around SSEs, but there's got to be opportunities here somewhere. And Michael's great insight was that you have got to work with these scientists. So even my 3 years as a PhD, I produced an outcome saying that farmers in the grazing system are really important. And the farmer said, we've been saying that for 20 years, but nobody's listened to us. But having the science to prove it and to monitor and to show the impact of what farmers do was critically important. And that allowed farmers to engage, and others like national parks, Tagisk and the department to engage at the time, and to work together for a blueprint for the future of farming in the Burns. Those are the preliminary stages, and since 2010 we've been implementing those findings in as creative a way as we can.
And how does it work for farmers now?
So I often think it's about three things. Okay, my job in managing the Burn programme is about three things. It's about motivating farmers to deliver for the environment and to deliver for their region. And I've come to the conclusion, to simplify things, it's about three things. It's about the pocket, the head and the heart. The pocket, farming is a business, these things have got to pay. So we've basically put a price on the farming practices which produce biodiversity, good water quality, maintain the landscape, and also the farmers are producing food. So the better the condition your environment is in, the more money you get. It's like taking an animal to the market. The better condition, the higher the price. And farmers get that and they respond to it wonderfully well. That's the pocket. I think the head, if you're a beef farmer or a dairy farmer or a tillage farmer, you go to Tagisk, you go somewhere for advice. But who advises you on farming for nature, to enhance your biodiversity, to protect water? Who tells you about that? So I think there's a whole piece around that, the research. So we have a local office in the Burn where farmers can ask anything they want. We give them best practice guidelines, we give them support in any way that we want. And we do a lot of knowledge transfer between farmers. What's the best way to do it? And the third piece, I think, is the heart. How do we get farmers to buy into it? And we often overlook this, and this is why our agri-environmental schemes have never reached their full potential. And I've seen it with our farmers, our 350 farmers. Those that really get it are phenomenal. They do so much and they deliver so much. So it's that piece. So we've thought a lot about what values farmers hold dear. And it's not just about the money. It's about the fairness and the transparency of the payment. But it's also about the freedom to farm. So if you take that away from a farmer, you've got an uphill battle. So we give the farmers optimal freedom to farm their land. And if they deliver the outcomes we want, we reward them. If they don't, that's fine, we don't. And the third thing is paperwork. Farmers hate paperwork. And there was a discussion this morning, and I think you repeated there, Martin, about permissions. If you want to remove some scrub in the Burn, for instance, to protect an archaeological site, you've got a forest felling licence, you've got to get National Parks and Wildlife permission, you've got to get permission from the National Monument Service and increasingly from the local authority. So we've developed, in conjunction with the Department of Ag, a sort of a set of guidelines for small-scale works. So if you've got a small-scale work, you apply for it, we give the permission in our office. So the farmer has nothing to worry about. He's fully legal once we tick the box, and we do the jobs of all those other agencies for them. So it works beautifully well. And with our system, the farmer gets on with what he's good at, which is farming. So that's the pocket, the head and the heart. I think they're the solution that we've sort of come upon over the years.
And the sort of parallel thing going on there as well is, if I'm right in understanding this, the rural employment that it provides then for your office. So the set of ecologists and scientists who are in the office as well. So you have on the one hand farmers thinking this is working, it's working for the environment, it's working for what they're doing. But then also you have that kind of activity at local level, which is really important as well.
It's hugely important.
It's expensive, I presume.
Actually not. You'd be surprised. It's not, and I want to come back to that.
Yeah.
But I think if you get the interface between the farmer and the landscape right, and the management is good, all these additional benefits come along. Like we've got 2 or 3 guys now making these locally designed traditional gates, for instance. We've got a cohort of 60 farmers who are available to do contracting work for other farmers. We've got farmers leading tours of their farm now, and that's such a rich seam in an urbanised society. So there's all that. There was an external evaluation commissioned by the department last year showing that 20 additional jobs have been created every year out width of the programme, out width of our office.
And forgive me for saying the word expensive, because that's important, it's not.
It's not expensive. So we introduced this notion of a result-based payment about 10 years ago, and there was a lot of worries that this is very expensive and very complex, but actually it's not. It's very simple and it's very easy to do it, and it's very, very effective. What costs a lot more actually is the planning the farm works, because there's a lot of paperwork and a lot of messy stuff involved in that. But I think what's really important, Ella, is that the money is spent locally. Like we have 7 people in our project team, they're all based locally. A lot of them are farmers' sons and daughters as well, working in our office. So it's bringing that, it's devolving that kind of financial mechanism to the countryside, to the areas in which it belongs. So it creates a sense of ownership, but also brings money into the community, both the administration and the delivery of these programs.
And what have been the outcomes for nature and life in the Burn?
They've been really good. I always hope for more, but like we track the environmental health of each field on each farm over the last 10 years. That's 1,700 fields covering 23,000 hectares of land with about 350 farmers. Every year since we started, the overall environmental health score, which is our indicator of environmental quality, has improved incrementally. Starting with 6.6 and gradually etching up every year to 7.35, I think it is now. So there's that benefit. And I think what we sometimes forget as well is that I think farmers need to feel relevant in society, and our farmers, I think, really feel that they're contributing something meaningful. And the last thing I'd say on that front is that I really believe what Hannah said is that farmers are the solution. They are the solution. We've got a massive problem ahead with climate and biodiversity and things like food nutrition as well. And I think farmers are the solution, but we need to reimagine farming and the role of farmers, and I think that's the exciting part. If we can see farmers as, I hate the term ecosystem service providers, but I think if we can see them in that broader sense of the ones who produce great food, look after biodiversity, maintain water quality, you know, suck in carbon, all that kind of thing.
So this is the broadening out of the definition of what it means to be a farmer beyond just I produce beef or I produce an animal that's then sold on.
Yeah.
It's much broader than that.
Yeah, and as Michael Laverne, again a farm leader, says, farmers will respond to the needs of society at any point in time, whether it's more meat or more food, or whether it's these ecosystem services. So if they want biodiversity, we'll give it to them.
So Martin, I feel like we can just finish the session. There's your answer. Let's go to the pub. What do you make of what you hear? I mean, you are a farmer. You also know the farmers that, you know, you're chair of the group. So when you hear that.
Yeah, well, that's very very similar to our situation. You know, that as I said initially, we took, you know, learning from Brendan, you know, and the way he had experience, and I think Brendan would agree that because he alluded to it there, it takes a long, long time for something to sink in, to get farmers to bed into something. It's all very new. This is new to me, sitting around here talking to all these fine people. You know, we were the ordinary people out from the hills, and but without those people out in the hills, there's no point in sitting around here. I always say that. You know, if you don't, they are out there willing to work and willing to take on what's guidance that's available, and sure, intelligence and guidance and knowledge, scientific and otherwise, is very, very important. You don't see what every day when you walk a mountain, what's under your feet, because you're not out there for that purpose. You know, if an ecologist goes out, he's looking for certain species, but a farmer's looking at his sheep, and the farmer in those areas has to make a living. That's otherwise you'd have definitely people leave the land, I think you have it in parts of the world today. You know, people walking away from the land can't make a living any longer. And the Blackstairs, I'm not for the Blackstairs as a whole and for the whole country. All the communities and all the area in the country has to be brought into this. And at the moment we're running a few pilot schemes which look at small areas. But there's parts of the country which I'm sure, you know, the scientists and people know quite well is completely neglected. And that will get worse if something's not done. This is the beginning, but I'll be long gone before it'll be finished.
And that broadening of the definition of what you do as a farmer, in general, do you think that's welcome? I mean, are farmers up for that?
Well, certainly are, because farmers have overcome all sorts of different, you know, depressions and recessions and what have you during the collapse of the financial collapse back in the noughties. There, sure, agriculture was the biggest for the National Exchequer, was the biggest income they had when all was settled and done. But we don't want to put farmers up on some sort of a pedestal that's you know, all with halos around their neck. That's not the case. But in general, farmers are out there working, to work long hours and to get the job done, and they're willing to work. Every scheme that was introduced through the Department of Agriculture was taken up by the farmer. My belief today is, I even said it to Minister Noonan in a conversation I had with him on the phone, there's too many schemes now. There's a scheme for every day of the week. You'd want someone advising you in Teagasc to know, should I apply for this one and that one and the other one?
So just finally, before we move on, I mean, Brendan's idea that the doorstep of his office is where a lot of the farmers can go to sort those things out, so they don't have to deal with all these agencies and these departments, but they just deal locally with a group of people who've been given those permissions on behalf of the state. Does that sound good to you?
Yes, locally it becomes nationally. Yeah. You know, you work local first in your own. You can't control the whole country. You know, any farmer can't do anything for his neighbouring farmer, can help him, but he can't do his work. So we start locally, as Brendan has done, and work and develop. And then this grows legs and walks. That's about it.
And Hannah, yesterday you made a point with the farmers, and they all profoundly agreed with you, which was, we need to be paid for this. But I'm mindful, a farmer told me, and in fairness, a lowland dairy farmer told me a few weeks ago, nothing I do environmentally will pay as good as producing milk. Full stop, end of conversation. So come back to me when, you know, I'm told that there's enough money there. So I just wonder, you know, what is the scope in the CAP money? What is the scope that you see in terms of providing more money to make sure that that isn't the case in the future?
Well, I actually think I know a lot of dairy farmers who would actually disagree with that farmer to begin with. And I think there's this idea out there that environmental measures won't pay farmers. And I don't think that's true. And actually, I've been on 2 farm walks recently, and what would be classed as intensive dairy farmers, over 200 cows each. But each of the walks has been so focused on growing clover. It's been unbelievable. And one of the farmers, he has 30% of his farm in clover. He's planning on getting more in clover. And that's a really powerful thing to do, because we import so much of our protein feed, soy, from usually South America and other countries that we can't grow here ourselves, and he isn't feeding any of that soy to his cattle because he's so good with his grassland management, so good with his clover, that he doesn't actually need to. And the clover as well provides a biodiversity habitat when it flowers as well for pollinators. So he's saving money. He's not spending money on artificial fertilisers. So he would fundamentally disagree with your guy in terms of no environmental measures do actually pay me, and I'm supporting the environment, and I'm taking care of my own pocket as well, which Brendan mentioned is really important for farmers. In terms of the next Common Agricultural Policy, it's been heavily hinted at that things like EIPs, and we have one in the Blackstairs, we're looking at the Burn project as well, that farmers are going to be listened to more individually on the ground, and that payments are going to be more results-based. And I think that it is a very simple system that farmers do understand, that if I do this measure, then I will get paid for it. And this idea of the farmer going out and destroying the environment, that's not the case on my farm, and that's not the case with the farmers that I meet. So if the government, which I hope happens, do come up with policies and measures that farmers can take up, they will be taken up.
Niall from the Department of Agriculture, can you give a bit of insight, in as much as you can or want to, about the CAP and where the money can go in terms of everything that's been spoken of?
Tell us the schemes, Niall. Go on, tell us.
Well, what I can tell you is that I suppose since 1994, we've had Rural Environmental Protection Scheme. That's our first agri-environmental scheme we introduced in the country. And I suppose all our agri-environmental schemes up to the last CAP have been primarily prescription-based, so where the department set out a prescription. But in fairness, I suppose we would have had a consultation process with other stakeholders in the drawing up of all these schemes, such as the National Parks and Wildlife Service, etc., because they have the competency, with the mature areas and all like that. But our schemes would have been prescription-based. And farmers then, if they delivered a prescription, obviously they got their money. But I suppose in the last, in our current programme there, our current CAP, we had, I suppose, as well as our flagship agri-environmental scheme, GLAS, which was much more targeted. And as we moved along, we went to, we targeted, we moved away from complete whole farm and targeted measures. So GLAS was a more prescription-based scheme, and we targeted farmland birds, we targeted mature areas, high water quality areas, and we prioritised entry of farmers to deliver actions within those areas, but they were still prescription-based. And I suppose there was an opportunity in the last CAP then with the introductions of EIPs, and that was mentioned here earlier on this morning. And in fairness to the Burn is one of the EIPs, and I suppose we would have learned from what work Brendan had been doing down there in the Burn prior to now. So there was a programme of EIPs, and we had 2 determined EIPs where we recognised that in terms of the freshwater parra mussel area and the hen harrier, both of those were prioritised, and we discussed that with Brussels, that they would be would go ahead, and then we'd have an open call for other EIPs. And we had a number of open calls then. And look at, I suppose...
just in terms of, and it's very helpful to get that background, but in terms of the future, I mean, obviously we're in the next round of CAP, 2023 to 27. Where is it going? I mean, is there a sense, again, in as much as you can say, that the results-based schemes, that farmers should really get ready for that is where things are going, or not?
Oh yeah, well, yes. I suppose Ireland in terms of Europe are at the forefront of delivering results-based schemes in terms of our EIPs. And Brendan would know this. We've been over with the EU Commission like on a number of occasions. So we are out there, and we have a lot of learnings from them, and we see that like from the results-based measures, as everyone has said here, like farmers seem to engage more with those measures, and they're involved in the design, and they're paid then whether they deliver or don't deliver. So certainly we're looking at that. Our CAP strategic plan is being designed at the minute, and we certainly are looking at, I suppose, we will have results-based measures in it. I suppose even in advance of that, we launched this year our own REAP results agri-environmental scheme as a pilot. So we had 2 big actions in our last agri-environmental schemes around grasslands. So from the learnings of the EIPs, we've piloted a number of these to see how they would work in results-based. So they're running this year and next year, but we're quite confident that they will actually, we'll be able to manage them at a much bigger scale. So we will certainly, in our next CAP strategic plan, we're looking at having a number of operational groups to deliver results-based measures around the country.
Okay.
So, and also then we're going to have one agri-environmental climate measure, and within that then we'll be prioritising some areas for operational groups to deliver results-based, and also then outside of that then we're planning on delivering some more results-based program or measures around grasslands in particular. Okay,
and Brendan, I presume you would always say we need more money to pay farmers more for biodiversity, and the more you pay, the more you're going to have succession. You're more, the next generation is going to be attracted to these things, and really we need to up the budget.
Yeah, I think that's true. I'm all for more money for farmers, but they have to deliver. I mean, that's the caveat I'd have. If they're not delivering, then they shouldn't be getting more. But if they are delivering, I think it's superb value for money. Like we've allocated, I think 1.1 million euros this year to Burn farmers for delivering environmental outcomes. That's just for good management. And that's a huge chunk of money for a small peripheral rural area. But only those who are really engaging and delivering are getting it. And that's important. The second thing I'd say is, I think Niall is right, and to echo that, we're often very critical of the Department of Ag, but I think Ireland is leading at a European level in terms of these locally targeted, results-based payment approaches, and we've been lauded for that fact, and I think it needs to be recognised. And I think the success of these EIPs, these European Innovation Partnerships across Ireland, has been the best thing I've seen since I've started in this whole area, because people have a sense of ownership and a sense of control and a sense of, if we do this, we get there. So it's really, really changed the scene. And I think particularly I'd highlight the Hen Harrier project and the Pearl Mussel project, selfishly, because I think they're what have proved that the burn is a success, because they've taken the ideas from the burn and they've applied it at scale using new technology, bringing in communities into it. Like the Hen Harrier project, they're sponsoring local hurling teams, they're erecting street art. So it's where the environment is bleeding out into the community, and that's wonderful. So if we can get that foundation right and the payment right, then the additional benefits, the add-ons, just start popping out. And I think those two projects in particular have shown that this thing can be scaled and can deliver environmentally, socially, and critically, economically for the regions.
And is it critical that they're working with scientists on those EIPs?
I can't emphasise that enough. And I think there's a little bit of a kind of a brigade within some of the farmers' unions about the money going to the white coats. If something is to work, and with a result-based scheme, it has to work, you don't get paid, remember that, you do need good scientific input in terms of designing the measures and in terms of monitoring the impact and the outcomes. So you have to have that. It won't always be there, but you need that to get things started. Now, a lot of the science is there in terms of the scorecards. If you wanted to have a result-based scheme in a place like this, the scorecards are all there. But you do need that science, the scientific input from day one, and you do need that broader community engagement as well, which is what I think is wonderful here. You already have this community wanting to be part of it. That's fantastic. But science is critical.
And Dara, I mean, what can Teagasc offer? I mean, Brendan made an interesting point there about farmers being able to go to them and ask, what should I do here? And it's something that I hear quite a lot, and the farmers don't know where's the focal point. They know where to go if they want to produce more milk, but where's the point that they can go to if they want to work more in sort of ecological ways in terms of farming?
Okay, so Teagasc are improving their capabilities and capacity in relation to the research from a biodiversity point of view. And I should highlight that 66% of the Teagasc researchers in biodiversity are in this room, so myself and Steph. But we're still falling short. We still only have 3 biodiversity researchers, and only half our time is to biodiversity research. We are upskilling advisors and supporting advisors in relation to working with the freshwater pearl mussel projects in relation to hen harrier and building on that capacity. Moving towards the signpost farms now that there's a lot of talk about, there's talks going on about a greater representation of HNV farmland within these signpost farms, because signpost is trying to address sustainability challenges, and either side of the intensity gradient has a different type of sustainability challenge. One might be more environmental sustainability, and then for HNV it might be more economic sustainability. But there is, going back to my earlier point, we still need to improve capacity, not just Teagasc, but the other advisors and other private advisors as well, to increase capacity in our skill sets for disseminating whatever knowledge we have in relation to biodiversity, in relation to how to manage these systems. So we need to go back to the universities, back to the college, the agricultural courses that are training up the next advisors and training up the next farmers, such that these systems, these upland HNV systems, are also considered, as opposed to maybe the greater focus that has been on the 15,000 or so intensive dairy farms. We need to also consider the 40,000 HNV farms.
Is that happening?
There is greater input in relation to biodiversity messages within agricultural courses. I can't speak for all universities. For the ones where I'm lecturing, there is greater focus on sustainability within some of these more intensive dairy production systems and more intensive dairy courses, but there is greater incorporation of biodiversity messages and wider environmental messages, obviously.
Enough?
There's never enough. We're always going to be selfish that we say there should be way more advisors, there should be way more researchers supporting farmers like Mary and Martin with the messages and with the management practices that they're hoping to implement. There's never going to be enough. But is it on the right trajectory? And building on what Niall is saying, similar to what he's saying about introduction of EIPs, are there enough EIPs? No. Is it right? Are we on the right trajectory? Yeah. Would you like to see more money going there faster? Yes. And again, building on what Niall was saying, I think there's opportunities now under this strategic plan to learn from the lessons from the Burn and the bigger scale EIPs. The challenge with some of the smaller EIPs is that you lose some of the money going to administrative, because if you have a small EIP, it's always going to be difficult and more challenging administratively, whereas by increasing to scale, you reduce the administrative costs and you get more of the money going towards the results-based payments. It's where you actually want the money to go as well.
And the EIPs are funded for a certain period of time. What should happen to them when the funding comes to an end?
Well, you would hope that learning from the Burn that there's an afterlife and there's building on beyond those 5-year, 4-year timeframes of the EIPs. But that's being limited by CAP and by the strategic plans within CAP. But you would hope that we've learned from the Burn and we've learned from Kerry Life resulting in freshwater pearl mussel that when these schemes work, that they do seem to get funded beyond the natural life cycle of their original funding goal.
Mairead, can I bring you in here? From everything that you've heard, and you heard this morning session as well, can you give us some thoughts and your own feelings about what you're hearing and the potential?
Yeah, what I'm hearing really, I suppose, the policy really is to produce food for the mass palate. We're not teaching our children in primary schools what eating well means, what good food is, how to cook it, to provide for themselves. They go to the shop, buy a tin, and just listening to a lady over there on farming. My neighbour is producing Coolatin cheddar from grass-fed, from total grass, and it's a natural food, local food. We need to put more emphasis on teaching people in schools to produce local food. I spent 10 years as an area engineer in the Bagnstown to Borris area, and my major emphasis was on keeping the roads from potholes. And I had big rows with the farmers, sending them out hedge cutting notice to cut their hedges and taking them. But then we had a discussion, and I was educated in the culture, the local lore, and what these hedges meant. There was shelter, there was wildlife in them, there was everything in them. And we came to an agreement, and if you see the roads down in that area now, they're very good. But the hedges are not cut to the scut. So there needs to be a huge education programme in maintaining roadside hedges for biodiversity. And that's another thing I'm just listening to there. I'm actually an organic farmer myself, and I farm shorthorns. And every single year, I love trees, I am cut another hectare, because I see the deer has had her doe in that place. I'm not going to disturb it. There's a rabbit over there, there's eagles, there's everything. But the policy is to reduce and reduce and reduce all the time. Now, if I suppose my livelihood depended on farming, I would have to get rid of all that and make sure I was doing it the way the department wanted. So there does need to be a lot more focus on speaking with one another, all the different agencies, all the different, and you know, I'm looking at even the education, say in Kildalton, it's about intensify machinery, buy this, buy that. It's not about actually to just use your land and look at the type of land you have and what suits that type of land. I farm shorthorns because I'm in the Wicklow Hills and the Cardo-Wicklow border. And they're very, very docile, very suited to that. They mind themselves. So I'm not bringing an animal that's not really suited for the area. So not every type of farming is suitable for every type of area. You do need to look what actually was up there in the Blackstairs, what's suitable, what lives there, what can you use that won't take from the biodiversity. And we need to actually look at food production. We are producing too much food. We should produce probably less and get paid more for it. Like the steaks I buy in the shop, huge big steaks, I only need half that steak. Look at me. So we need to actually look at all of that. So there is a balance. And the context of the principle of subsidiarity that the European Union has promoted, that we need to look at each area in context. What is the environment like, what's the biodiversity like, what's the climate like, and then farm in that context. And as I said, eat local would be what I would be saying.
So I get a sense from everything you're saying that we need a sort of systemic shift.
Completely systemic shift, we do. Because we are all in silos, and I have to tick my boxes here in this. You're ticking your boxes, you have your boxes, we've all our boxes. We need to look at the whole system. And the EIPs, I think, possibly are the way forward, because it's a community-led initiative, community-based approach. We're keeping, somebody mentioned this morning that we need farmers on the Blackstairs. So we need communities. So it's all about sustaining communities and living, with your environment and working with it.
Okay, thank you very much. We've only got a few minutes left, and I'm sorry about that. We'll take some questions or comments if people want to say anything, and if there are any online, somebody can shout them out.
Can I just make a point there?
Certainly, Niall.
You asked Dara about what's being done about education, around biodiversity. We also have the Farming for Nature initiative, which Brendan would be involved in, his colleagues, that the Department of Agriculture and the National Parks and Wildlife Service are funding, and we've upped our funding every year since the initiative started in 2018, and that's a very good resource as well as Teagasc, and there's a lot, there is a lot more happening in this space, and like we do have in our, and when she'll be here this afternoon, we have a minister, a junior minister for land use and biodiversity now. So in the last couple of years, we'll always be criticised, but that's just, some people's jobs to do that. But we have increased an awful lot in relation to our interaction around the area of biodiversity. And we're funding a farmland biodiversity officer, or farmland pollinator officer, my apologies, Liam. And, so this is something we're looking at. We've introduced pollinator monitoring as well. That's going to start off this year as well. So there's an awful lot happening now, and we also, in conjunction with Teagasc and others, we're trying to get a much more, I suppose, engagement, and training advisors in this space as well.
Thank you so much. And farmingfornature.ie is an important resource. We'll just take some questions. Rosemary, have you got?
Yeah. So just online, we've got a question come in saying, is it not obvious that the successful upland EIPs like Bride Project, Suez and the Blackstairs be included in the proposed Pillar 1 ecosystem?
I don't know who wants to take that. The Pillar 1, Dara, no?
likely to be more Pillar 2, I'd assume. So, but and Bride wouldn't be uplands. But I'd say the current direction of negotiation seems that there's scope for it to be, I assume, Nile to be incorporated in some element of.
Just briefly now there.
Yeah, well, look at. I suppose the eco schemes are new on their Pillar 1 side, and I suppose it's to deliver more for the environment on the Pillar 1. There are a number of items up for discussion at the minute, but like I suppose the learnings of the EIPs have really been taken in more on the Pillar 2 side.
Okay, any other questions? Yes, gentleman here.
Ian Lovely with Altasca, and I'm not associated with Altasca much because I'm involved in farming, but I'm very pleased to say that we've been bequeathed a property on the Tyrone-Monaghan border, 2,300 acres of heathland, and very much inspired by the Burn scheme and other area-based schemes. We're promoting organic dexter grazing in the area, which is part of the ecological control of invasive vegetation also, and fire control. But I'm also on the. It's been mentioned the stakeholder group for the CAP's strategic plan. So you get an inside track as to what's going on. And the first thing I have to say, and to endorse what Pádraig Fogarty from the Irish Wildlife Trust said earlier, everything is being undermined by this Food-Wise 2030 strategy. We had one environmental rep on a 30-member industry group which has pushed through a strategy which is all about continued intensification and greenwashing, really unrealistic projections of carbon offsetting which don't stand up to science. And I must say Teagasc doesn't emerge with any credit on that side either. But what I'm really asking, and I'm really frustrated by, first of all, the CAP strategic plan has been undermined by this Food-Wise 2030 strategy, which is all about industry intensification, needs to be scrapped. We've also had decades of schemes, not just in Ireland but across Europe, which have failed in reversing biodiversity loss, as we're seeing from the Article 17 reports. The European Court of Auditors, which looked at what is the European taxpayer getting money for the massive subsidy that's gone in billions in CAP over the decades, and the answer has been no, and that includes Ireland as well as Poland and other countries. Okay. So what I'm asking, what's going to be done about giving proper support to area-based schemes that produce high-value organic produce, where the farmers get added value, the material can be branded, and get higher value purchased by hotels and restaurants and for ecotourism in the area, and I'm not seeing that happening at the moment.
Okay, thank you, Ian. Yes.
Yes, Charlie Brooks, my name.
Yes, Charlie.
I'm a local farmer and also a local public representative.
Perhaps you'd stand up.
Yes, and I suppose I have good enough experience as a local representative.
And it's my fault because I didn't come to the audience soon enough. Yes. But if we could just keep it fairly concise.
Yes, I'll keep it tight. Yeah. I suppose, you're in County Carlow, and County Carlow is predominantly a very fertile county. And I suppose since I've been, even before I was born, it's always been about production. We have been told as farmers that the stones in the fields are the enemy. The drains had to be put into the fields. These fields had to be dried. They had to be arable. They had to produce food. This is where we started. This is where the environment. This is where the scheme started off. The grand scheme started off in the 50s, 60s, 70s. I'm old enough to remember all these schemes, and I'm old enough to remember all these schemes being implemented. Now things have changed. As I said, Carlow is a very productive county. Now I suppose in real terms, what kept the Blackstairs wild, as it is wild, the fact that maybe the land mightn't be as productive as, say, down the country. So that's simple enough. Now, things have changed. Things have changed dramatically. Now we're looking at more, we'll say, biodiversity. And that's a big, biodiversity is probably one of the biggest things we're facing at the minute, along with carbon, trying to subgrade carbon. But there's always been biodiversity. Before these schemes came, before these schemes were ever put in, we had biodiversity. As I said, I'm old enough to remember expanses of bogs, and I'm old enough to remember the corncrake, and old enough to remember the curlews in those bogs. Now, they're gone. See, this biodiversity thing, it was there before. We have to remember this. We had it. We had it in abundance. We had it all over the Blackstairs, but we also had it down in the lowlands, where the bogs were, where the the present productive land is now. Okay? That's what we have. That land was turned into productive land. Now, I have to disagree with the last speaker saying that though the schemes that were put in to get that land into production, they weren't the proper schemes. They were the proper schemes for the simple reason we had to feed the people. This is about food as well. We have to remember this now, that food production is what farmers do predominantly. That is their job. That's what we're paid to do. It's been drummed into farmers for generation after generation after generation, food production. Okay, that is changing. That is changing now. And if we, and I've discussed this with other people, what we have now is an emergency, climate change, and we have a biodiversity emergency. We have these two, right? But also we have a lifestyle that we have got. Like I have, the mobility I have, and I assume everybody in this room has the same mobility, is serious mobility, serious communications that I have that my parents never had, my grandparents would have dreamt of. If we want to hold on to our lifestyle that we have, which is very, very affluent, it's a first world lifestyle, we have to, and if we want to go down the road of climate change, sequestering carbon, going after biodiversity, getting back to biodiversity, we're going to have to look at it, and we're going to have to bring the stakeholders together, e.g. farmers like myself, and it's back to money. God made the world, but money makes a turn, and that's the reality of it.
They have to be bigger than beef and
That is the reality of it.
So
I'm...
Thank you, Charlie.
Thinking, like a farmer came to me the other day, he was after being cut on a margin. I went over and looked at it with him. He was being cut on a margin. It was in August. He said, why am I after being cut on that margin? It was beside a river. He said, if I had cut that with a flail mower, I wouldn't have been cut. You could hear the grasshoppers hopping in it.
And I know that
And if he had cut that, he was in business.
In the next cap. And Charlie, I'm sorry, I'm going to have to cut you off. If we can just have two more comments and then we're going to have lunch. Briefly again, if you can.
Thanks very much. Name is Jim Fitzharris. My ancestors were farmers in the Blackstairs since the early 1700s. I'm a current farmer myself. I am a farm with nature very much, and I work towards the high nature value farming process. But I'm a member of the Blackstairs EIP. I was delighted to be working with Mary and Martin and Peter Rose here in setting up the EIP initially. But a few things to emphasise. The EIP is from the bottom up initiative. And it's brilliant to be part of an initiative where you make the decisions of what to do on the farm, you're evaluating what you've done, and you're paid on the results. So, and the other thing the VIP brought back to us the mettle of years gone by with farmers working together, where it's great to see groups of farmers on the hill working together. The third thing it brought out was a value to the landscape that we've been managing for generations. And it's great that there's recognition given now, and the money that's earned, and it has to be earned because you have to show results for what you've done. So that's the details of the EIP, and long may it last.
Thank you.
But I'm also grouse conservationist, and it's a passion of mine. The grouse is an iconic Irish species. We have since the Ice Age. It is one of the species we looked at conservation in the Blackstairs. And there is an opportunity, I think, going forward to introduce a scheme similar to the Hen Harrier scheme for the Irish red grouse. Those numbers are in decline. And I compliment the Minister on initiating a fresh survey. And I would appreciate that people that do it this time will recognise that there is grouse in the Blackstairs as distinct to 2008 when they said there was none. That's it for the moment.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. And finally, the woman behind you there, and then we'll have to wrap. Thank you.
Thanks, Eda. Sinead O'Brien from Swan. Yeah, I just wanted to pick up on a comment that was made earlier. I think it was by Hannah about, or maybe it was yourself, about the farmer who said I can't produce anything, more profitable than milk. But it's not just about following the money, I don't think, and this is probably an unpopular thing to say, and I don't know if it's maybe not a good thing to be going off to lunch with, but it's not just about about money and incentives. I mean, at the moment, farming is causing an awful lot of pollution. And we can't, I wouldn't like us to finish this session with the impression that the only way we can stop that is by giving farmers, one type of payment or another. And I think there is also an obligation on farmers to stop polluting. in particular nitrate pollution, and we'll probably talk about it in the next session. And I don't think necessarily the narrative has to be that they have to get some kind of a compensation to stop doing that. But I'm also conscious that farmers have been driven in that direction over, the last decades, and there also almost needs to be a kind of a moral or philosophical discussion about whether you penalise farmers now for going down a road that is now making them cause pollution. So I'm not saying it's simple, but I would like to say that it can't just be about compensating people to stop polluting.
So, and your point is that there are legal limits as well here that people have to operate under. Brendan,
Exactly.
Can I finish with you? It's often said it's fine, what happened in the Burren is fine, but it can't happen in the rest of Ireland. The Burren is a special place, particular place, and it's not transferable. And this is something that, is still said, and I know you feel strongly about that. So can we just finish with a sense of why it is possible, what you have done down there?
Well, I think, really, to be honest, the proof is in the pudding. I think the hen harrier project, the freshwater pearl mussel project, what they're doing in Connemara, in Wicklow, there's so many great examples now of where basically the local community have taken ownership of their own destiny. They've started to shape their future. They've done it in a way that's very efficient, that uses the best of new technology, that's very forward-looking, that's engaged, the community as part of it. So it's been done. We've got all the evidence now to show that it does work. It does work in a way that delivers for the environment, good value for money for the taxpayer. So I think it's the model for the future, and I think the big picture to watch out on now is, and Sinead, about compensation. We're not talking about compensation. We're talking about paying farmers to deliver ecosystem services, which is an entirely different kind of a thing. But I think there's a huge opportunity now in the next Common Agricultural Policy, because we have more capacity to design our own CAP strategic plan. I think we should be as ambitious as we possibly can, because we do have the evidence, we have the science, and by God, is it urgent that we do something now? We can't wait another 7 years.
And sorry, just literally to finish up on that, what exactly do you think should happen with it, to be specific?
Well, I'd like to see the whole sort of locally targeted, result-based model expanded massively across the high nature value farmland of Ireland. And then I'd like to see a new round of EIPs dealing with new issues, whether it's archaeology in Rathcrohan, or whether it's all these different environmental priorities we have starting up to inform the next CAP. So I think we have to keep being innovative, working, but we have to scale the answers that we know work at the moment. So I think that's what I'd like to see.
Wonderful. Just really quickly, because the focus has been on farmers, but not everyone out there is a farmer in the audience or a farmer listening online, but everyone is a consumer. And to go home and ask yourselves, when you go to the shopping market, how much are you paying for that litre of milk, and how much are you paying for your beef, and if that's sustainable. And if you want to see family farms thrive in Ireland, and the type of family farm that you want to see thrive in Ireland, now is the time to support that, because not everyone here is a farmer, but everyone is a consumer. So please remember that when you go home. Okay, we're going to take, I think, half an hour, Rosemary? Is half an hour okay? 35 minutes. But please put your hands together for the panel. Thank you very much.